Fallen for the Demon, A Love from the Depths. By Raven Sinclairs. Chapter 1, The Summoning Circle. The ancient chalk circle gleamed in the candlelight as Lydia traced the final symbols with trembling fingers. Her grandmother's grimoire lay open beside her on the dusty attic floor, its yellowed pages whispering secrets that had been hidden for generations. She had memorized every word of the incantation, practiced every gesture until her movements flowed like a dark dance. Tonight, under the blood moon that painted everything in crimson shadows, she would finally have her revenge. Marcus Blackthorne had destroyed everything she held dear. Her father's business, her family's reputation, her mother's health, all casualties in his ruthless corporate takeover. Traditional justice had failed her. The courts favored men with money and power, and Marcus had both in abundance. But there were older laws, deeper powers that cared nothing for mortal wealth or influence. Tonight, she would invoke forces that predated civilization itself. The candles flickered as she began to chant in the ancient tongue, words that felt foreign yet familiar on her lips. The air grew thick and electric, charged with an energy that made her skin tingle and her heart race. She had expected fear, but instead she felt alive in a way she never had before. The circle began to glow with an otherworldly light, and shadows danced at the edges of her vision. Demon ex profundis te invoco, she whispered, her voice gaining strength with each syllable. Come forth from the depths, and grant me the power of vengeance. The temperature plummeted suddenly, and her breath misted in the air. The candle flames stretched impossibly tall, casting writhing shadows on the slanted ceiling. The floorboards groaned as if something immense pressed down from another dimension. Then, with a sound like reality tearing, darkness poured into the circle. He materialized slowly, shadow-given form, emerging from the void like a sculpture carved from midnight itself. Tall and powerfully built, with sharp features that seemed crafted to tempt and terrify in equal measure. His skin held a faint luminescence, pale as moonlight but warm as candleflame. Dark hair fell in waves to his shoulders, and when he opened his eyes, they burned like molten gold in the depths of his angular face. Who dares summon Asmodeus? His voice was velvet over steel, beautiful and dangerous. The words seemed to resonate not just in her ears, but in her very bones. Lydia's carefully prepared speech died in her throat. She had expected something monstrous, all fangs and claws and sulphurous smoke. Instead, she found herself staring at the most devastatingly attractive man she had ever seen. The power radiating from him was undeniable. She could feel it pressing against her skin like a physical force, but his appearance was that of a fallen angel rather than a beast from hell. I summoned you, she managed, proud that her voice didn't shake despite the way her pulse hammered in her throat. I need your help. He stepped closer to the edge of the circle, and she noticed that he moved with predatory grace, every gesture fluid and controlled. You summoned me? A mortal child playing with forces beyond her comprehension? His golden gaze swept over her appraising ly, and she felt heat bloom in her cheeks. Tell me, little summoner, what makes you think you can control a prince of hell? The condescension in his tone sparked her anger, burning away her intimidation. I don't need to control you. I'm offering you a bargain. Ah? His lips curved in a smile that was equal parts seductive and predatory. Now you have my attention. What could a mortal possibly offer that would interest me? A soul for a service, Lydia replied, lifting her chin defiantly. My soul freely given, in exchange for the destruction of Marcus Blackthorne. Asmodeus threw back his head and laughed, a sound like dark honey and distant thunder. Your soul? Child, do you have any idea how many souls are offered to me in a single day? What makes yours special enough to warrant my personal attention? Heat flooded Lydia's cheeks, but she held his burning gaze. Maybe it's not special to you, but it's all I have. And I'll give it willingly for the chance to see Marcus Blackthorne pay for what he's done. The demon's laughter faded, and he studied her with newfound interest. Such hatred. Such beautiful pure rage. He circled the edge of the summoning circle, like a caged predator. Tell me about this Marcus Blackthorne. What has he done to inspire such delicious fury? The words poured out of her then, years of pain and humiliation, watching her family crumble under Marcus's calculated assault. Her father's engineering firm, built over decades of honest work, dismantled piece by piece. The smear campaign that destroyed their reputation. The stress that triggered her mother's heart attack. The foreclosure notice that would take their family home. He did it because he could, she finished, her hands clenched into fists. Because we were beneath his notice, until we stood in the way of something he wanted. He crushed us like insects and never looked back. Asmodeus had gone still during her recitation, his golden eyes fixed on her face with an intensity that made her skin burn. And you want me to kill him? I want him to suffer the way my family has suffered. I want him to lose everything he values, to feel powerless and small. I want him to know despair. Vengeance is a dish best served with exquisite cruelty, the demon mused, his voice taking on a contemplative quality. But such elaborate revenge requires time and careful planning. It cannot be accomplished with a simple curse or moment of violence. How long? Lydia asked, though part of her wondered why it mattered. If she was giving up her soul, what did time mean? Months? Perhaps a year? His eyes glittered with dark amusement. Are you prepared to wait that long for your satisfaction? And more importantly, are you prepared for what such an arrangement would require? What do you mean? I am not some minor imp to be summoned and dismissed at will. If we make this bargain, I will remain in the mortal realm until it is fulfilled. You will be bound to me, as I will be bound to the task. We will be intimately connected. The way he said those last words sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the supernatural cold. Connected how? I will need an anchor in this realm, someone to provide me with the energy necessary to maintain physical form and power. That anchor will be you. He moved closer to the circle's edge, and she could see golden flecks dancing in his eyes like trapped flames. I will feed on your emotions, your life force, your very essence. In return, I will grant you front row seats to Marcus Blackthorne's exquisite destruction. Lydia's mouth went dry. Will it hurt? Pain? No. But you will feel everything I feel, as I will experience everything you do. Your anger will become my fuel, your satisfaction my reward. We will be bound together until the bargain is complete. And then you take my soul to hell? Then I take your soul to hell, he confirmed, but something flickered across his expression too quickly for her to interpret. She looked around the attic at the remnants of her old life, childhood toys gathering dust, photo albums documenting happier times, her grandmother's occult books that had led her to this moment. Everything that mattered was already gone or dying. What was a soul compared to justice? I accept, she said firmly. Asmodeus smiled, and for the first time it seemed genuinely pleased rather than mocking. Then let us seal our bargain properly. He stepped into the circle, crossing the barrier as if it were merely chalk on wood, rather than a mystical boundary. Up close he was even more overwhelming, taller than she had thought, radiating heat and power that made her head spin. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and when she didn't, his fingers traced along her jawline with surprising gentleness. Your soul for Marcus Blackthorne's destruction, he murmured, his voice hypnotic. Bound in darkness, sealed in shadow, witnessed by powers older than time itself. His touch sent fire racing through her veins, and when his lips met hers, the world exploded in sensation. It was like being struck by lightning and embraced by flame simultaneously. Power flowed between them, dark and intoxicating, forging chains that bound their very essences together. She could feel him in her mind, his amusement and hunger and something else she couldn't quite identify. When he finally pulled away, she was gasping and trembling, her lips burning from his kiss. Golden light flickered beneath her skin for a moment before fading, leaving her marked in ways she was only beginning to understand. It is done, Asmodeus said, and his voice was rougher than before. You are mine now, Lydia Ashford, bound to me until the debt is paid. What happens now? She whispered. His smile was pure seduction and promised danger. Now, my dear little summoner, we begin to plan Marcus Blackthorn's downfall. And I promise you, it will be absolutely magnificent. As the candles guttered out one by one, leaving them in darkness, Lydia realized she had never felt more alive. The demon's presence filled the space around her like a living thing, protective and possessive and utterly intoxicating. She had summoned him for revenge, but as his golden eyes gleamed in the shadows, she began to suspect she had gotten far more than she bargained for. Outside, storm clouds gathered, and thunder rolled across the sky like laughter from the depths of hell itself. Chapter 2: Unexpected Intimacy. 3 weeks had passed since the summoning, and Lydia's life had transformed in ways she never could have anticipated. Asmodeus, who had insisted she call him Ash in public, had seamlessly integrated himself into the mortal world with an ease that was both impressive and slightly terrifying. He had appeared the next morning with impeccable credentials, a mysterious past, and enough money to rent the penthouse apartment across from Marcus Blackthorn's office building. Watching him navigate human society was like watching a master actor slip into a perfectly crafted role. The bond between them had proven more complex than either had initially understood. True to his word, Ash fed on her emotions, but the process was nothing like the soul-draining vampirism she had imagined. Instead, it was intimate in a way that left her breathless and aching. When her anger flared, she could feel him drawing it into himself, transforming her rage into dark energy that made his eyes burn brighter. When she felt satisfaction at their small victories against Marcus, the pleasure doubled back on itself, amplified and returned until she was dizzy with euphoria. But it wasn't only the dark emotions he consumed. Joy, excitement, even simple contentment seemed to nourish him, and in return she experienced echoes of his own feelings, ancient and complex and utterly inhuman. His amusement felt like champagne bubbles in her bloodstream. His approval was warm honey spreading through her chest. And sometimes, in unguarded moments, she caught glimpses of something deeper that made her heart race and her cheeks burn. This morning found them in his apartment, maps and photographs spread across the massive dining table as they planned their next move against Marcus. Ash stood behind her chair, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, while she studied surveillance photos of their target. "He leaves the office every Tuesday at exactly 6:30, she murmured, tracing Marcus's route with her finger. "Takes the same path to his private gym. Always alone." "Creatures of habit make the best victims," Ash agreed, his breath warm against her ear. "They think their routines provide security, but they actually create vulnerability." Lydia shivered at his proximity, her concentration fracturing as his presence overwhelmed her senses. The bond between them had been growing stronger daily, and resisting its pull was becoming impossible. She could feel his awareness of her reaction, the way her pulse quickened and her breathing grew shallow. "You're distracted," he observed, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "I'm trying to focus," she protested, but even she could hear how breathless she sounded. "Are you?" His hand came to rest on her shoulder, fingers trailing along her collarbone with deliberate slowness. "Because I can feel every thought in that beautiful head of yours, and none of them have anything to do with Marcus Blackthorn." Heat flooded her cheeks as she realized he was right. All she could think about was the way his touch made her skin sing, the intoxicating scent of smoke and sandalwood that seemed to cling to him, the memory of that burning kiss that had sealed their bargain. Through their bond she could feel his hunger, not for her emotions this time, but for something far more primal. "This is complicated," she whispered. "The best things usually are." His other hand came up to tilt her chin, forcing her to meet his molten gaze. "You're fighting the bond, trying to maintain distance between us. Why?" "Because you're a demon," she said weakly. "And because this is supposed to be about revenge, not whatever this is. This is whatever we choose to make it." His thumb traced across her lower lip, and she couldn't suppress the small sound that escaped her throat. "The bond doesn't dictate our choices, Lydia. It only enhances what already exists between us." "What exists between us is a business arrangement," she tried to argue, but the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. Ash laughed softly, the sound vibrating through their connection until she felt it in her bones. Is that what you call the way you look at me when you think I'm not watching? Or the way your heart races every time I touch you? If this is business, darling, then I'm afraid you're a terrible negotiator. Before she could form a response, his lips found hers, and coherent thought became impossible. The kiss was nothing like the ritual binding that had sealed their pact. This was pure desire, devastating in its intensity, and she melted into him like snow and flame. His hands tangled in her hair, angling her head to deepen the kiss, and she could taste power and darkness and something uniquely him. Through their bond, she felt his emotions crash over her in waves, desire so intense it was almost violent, possessiveness that should have terrified her but instead made her feel cherished, and underneath it all, something tender and protective that seemed completely at odds with his demonic nature. In return, she felt her own feelings flow to him, want and confusion and a growing affection that had nothing to do with supernatural compulsion. When they finally broke apart, she was trembling and gasping, her hands fisted in his shirt as if he were the only solid thing in a world gone liquid. His eyes burned like molten gold, and she could see her own desire reflected in their depths. "This is insane," she whispered. "Sanity is overrated," he replied, his voice rough with want. "I've existed for millennia, Lydia. I've experienced every pleasure the mortal and immortal realms have to offer. But I have never felt anything like what flows between us. You're just saying that because of the bond? The bond amplifies what exists, it doesn't create what isn't there." His hands framed her face with surprising gentleness. "What I feel for you has nothing to do with demonic magic, and everything to do with the incredible woman who had the courage to summon the Prince of Hell and demand her due." "I'm not incredible," she protested. "I'm just angry and desperate and probably insane." "You're magnificent." The conviction in his voice made her breath catch. "You're fierce and loyal and beautiful, and you burn with a passion that puts hellfire to shame. Do you have any idea how rare it is to find someone willing to trade their very soul for justice? You must have had thousands of deals like ours." "Thousands of deals, yes. But never like ours." His thumb traced across her cheekbone with reverent care. "Most who summon demons want power or wealth or fame. Selfish desires born of greed or vanity. You wanted justice for your family. You were willing to damn yourself to protect the people you love. That kind of selfless courage is—" He paused, searching for words. "It's beautiful beyond description." Lydia felt tears prick at her eyes, overwhelmed by the sincerity in his voice and the emotions flowing through their bond. "What does this mean for us? For the bargain?" "It means we take things one day at a time," he said softly. "The contract stands, your soul is forfeit when Marcus Blackthorne is destroyed. But until that moment comes, we have time. Time to explore this connection between us, time to see where it leads. And if I decide I don't want to go to hell with you when this is over?" Something painful flickered across his expression before his usual confidence reasserted itself. "Then I will honor our original agreement and take only what was promised. Your soul belongs to me, Lydia, but your heart must be freely given." The distinction shouldn't have mattered, but somehow it changed everything. He wasn't trying to manipulate her feelings or coerce her into caring for him. Whatever was growing between them was real, born of genuine connection rather than supernatural influence. "Show me," she whispered. "Show you what?" "What you really look like. Not this human facade, you." Ash went very still, his golden eyes searching her face. "Are you certain? My true form is overwhelming for mortals." "I'm not most mortals," she pointed out. "I'm the woman who summoned you, remember? I'm stronger than I look." He stepped back, giving her space, and she immediately missed his warmth. "Close your eyes," he instructed gently. "The transformation can be intense." She obeyed, her heart hammering with anticipation and just a touch of fear. The temperature in the room began to rise, and she could hear what sounded like distant thunder. Power filled the air until it was thick enough to taste, electric and dangerous and utterly intoxicating. "Open your eyes," he said, and his voice carried harmonics that seemed to resonate in dimensions she couldn't name. When she looked, her breath caught in her throat. He was still recognizably Ash, but magnified and enhanced until he was almost too beautiful to look at directly. His skin held an inner luminescence that pulsed with each heartbeat, and shadows wreathed his form like living smoke. Dark wings spread behind him, not feathered like an angel's but bat-like and powerful, shot through with veins of gold. His eyes burned like stars, and when he smiled she caught a glimpse of fangs that should have terrified her but instead made heat pool low in her belly. "You're beautiful," she breathed, taking a step toward him. He laughed, the sound both delighted and disbelieving. "I'm a creature of darkness and temptation, Lydia. I am beautiful the way a blade is beautiful, perfect and deadly." "That doesn't make it less true." She reached out to touch his face, and his skin felt like warm silk over steel. "You're magnificent." "And you," he said, catching her hand and pressing it flat against his chest, "are either the bravest woman I've ever met or the most foolish. Why can't I be both?" His laughter rumbled through their bond, rich with affection and desire. "Oh, my darling summoner, you absolutely are both." When he kissed her this time, it was with his true form, and the sensation was overwhelming. Power flowed between them like liquid fire, and she could taste eternity on his lips. His wings curved around them, creating a cocoon of shadow and warmth, and for a moment she felt as if they were the only two beings in existence. The sound of her phone ringing broke the spell, and they reluctantly separated. Marcus Blackthorne's name flashed on the screen, and reality came crashing back. "It's him," she said, her voice still rough from their kisses. Ash's expression shifted, predatory intent replacing tender passion. "Answer it. Let's see what our prey wants." She accepted the call, putting it on speaker so Ash could hear. "Hello? Miss Ashford? This is Marcus Blackthorne. I believe we need to talk." Chapter 3, Games of Seduction and Power. Marcus Blackthorne's unexpected phone call had changed everything. His invitation to dinner at the city's most exclusive restaurant was clearly a trap, but it was also an opportunity they couldn't ignore. As Lydia stood before the mirror in her bedroom, adjusting the black dress Ash had insisted on buying for her, she wondered if she was about to walk into the lion's den, or if they were finally beginning to corner their prey. "You look stunning," Ash murmured from behind her, his reflection appearing over her shoulder in the mirror. He had returned to his human form, immaculately dressed in a charcoal suit that emphasized his predatory elegance. "Marcus won't know what hit him." "That's what I'm afraid of," Lydia replied, her hands trembling slightly as she fastened her grandmother's pearl necklace. "What if he suspects something? What if he knows about you?" "Impossible." Ash's hands settled on her waist, steadying her. "Mortals can't sense my true nature unless I allow it. To him, I'm simply a wealthy businessman who's taken an interest in a beautiful woman. Nothing more threatening than competition for your attention." Through their bond she could feel his confidence but also something else, a protective fury that simmered just beneath the surface. The thought of Marcus being in the same room as her, breathing the same air, clearly infuriated the demon in ways that went beyond their bargain. "You're jealous," she realized with surprise. "Possessive," he corrected without shame. "You are mine, Lydia. The contract aside, you belong to me in ways that transcend mere ownership. The thought of that insignificant mortal putting his hands on you makes me want to burn down half the city." His honesty was both thrilling and terrifying. "But you'll control yourself? For now?" His lips brushed against her neck, sending shivers down her spine. "But if he touches you, if he so much as looks at you with anything approaching lust, I will make his death far more creative than originally planned." The restaurant was everything Lydia had expected from Marcus's choice. Outrageously expensive, intimidatingly elegant, and designed to make anyone of modest means feel completely out of place. She spotted him immediately at a corner table, his silver hair and commanding presence making him stand out even among the wealthy clientele. He rose as they approached, his smile perfectly calculated to project charm and confidence. "Miss Ashford," he said, extending his hand. "I'm so glad you could join me. And you must be Alexander Darkmoor, Ash replied smoothly, his handshake brief and controlled. A friend of Lydia's. Marcus's eyes sharpened with interest as he took in Ash's expensive clothes and obvious wealth. Darkmoor? I don't believe I'm familiar with that name in business circles. I prefer to keep a low profile, Ash replied with a slight smile. Family money, you understand? Old European investments. As they settled into their seats, Lydia marveled at how effortlessly Ash slipped into the role of mysterious millionaire. His accent carried just a hint of something foreign, his mannerisms were perfectly calibrated to suggest old money and older secrets, and the way he ordered wine demonstrated knowledge that went far beyond mere wealth. Marcus was clearly intrigued, exactly as they had hoped. So, Miss Ashford, Marcus began once their drinks were served, I'm sure you're wondering why I asked you here tonight. The thought had crossed my mind, Lydia replied carefully. We don't exactly travel in the same social circles. No, we don't, Marcus agreed with a chuckle. But that's precisely why I wanted to speak with you. I've been giving considerable thought to our situation. Our situation? The unfortunate circumstances surrounding your father's business. The foreclosure proceedings. The hardship your family has endured. He leaned back in his chair, swirling his wine thoughtfully. I've come to realize that perhaps I was overzealous in my acquisition strategy. Lydia felt Ash's sudden tension through their bond, though his expression remained perfectly neutral. Overzealous, she repeated flatly. Aggressive, even. Business is war, as they say, but there's no reason for the casualties to be so personal. Marcus's smile was calculated to appear rueful. I'd like to make amends. What kind of amends? Ash asked, his voice carefully modulated. Marcus turned his attention to the demon, clearly sizing up potential competition. I'm prepared to offer Miss Ashford's family a settlement. Enough to pay off their debts, keep their home, perhaps even provide a comfortable retirement for her parents. In exchange for what? Lydia demanded, though she was already beginning to suspect. Your silence, naturally? No more legal challenges, no media attention to what some might characterize as my ruthless business practices. His smile turned predatory. And perhaps your company for a few social events. I find myself in need of an elegant companion for certain functions. The implication was clear, and through their bond, Lydia felt Ash's rage ignite like a solar flare. His expression remained calm, but she could see golden fire beginning to flicker in the depths of his eyes. That's quite a generous offer, she managed, her voice steady despite the fury and disgust churning in her stomach. I thought you might see it that way. A beautiful woman like yourself shouldn't be struggling to make ends meet. I could provide you with a very comfortable lifestyle, and all I ask in return is your companionship and discretion. The word companionship dripped with implications that made Lydia's skin crawl. Marcus Blackthorne was offering to buy her like a commodity, to pay her debts in exchange for her body and silence. It was exactly the kind of arrogant, dehumanizing behavior she had expected from him, but experiencing it firsthand still left her feeling nauseated. And if I refuse? She asked. Marcus's smile didn't waver, but his eyes grew cold. Then I'm afraid your family's situation will continue to deteriorate. Legal fees are expensive, and I have excellent lawyers. Eventually, you'll lose everything anyway, and I'll have no reason to offer compensation for your troubles. How thoughtful of you to explain the consequences so clearly, Ash said softly, and there was something in his tone that made Marcus look at him sharply. I believe in being direct in business matters, Marcus replied carefully. As do I. Ash leaned forward slightly, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. So let me be very direct with you, Mr. Blackthorne. The lady is not interested in your offer. I don't recall asking for your opinion, Mr. Darkmoor. You didn't need to ask. Lydia is under my protection, which means anyone who threatens her threatens me. I suggest you choose your next words very carefully. The menace in Ash's voice was subtle but unmistakable, and Marcus actually recoiled slightly. Through their bond, Lydia could feel the demon's control fraying, his true nature pressing against the human facade like a caged beast. Protection? Marcus laughed, but the sound was forced. What kind of protection could you possibly offer against legitimate business practices? The kind that money can't buy and lawyers can't fight, Ash replied with a smile that was all teeth and shadows. I have resources that would surprise you, Mr. Blackthorne. Ancient resources. For a moment, Marcus looked genuinely unsettled, as if he sensed something dangerous about the man across from him, without being able to identify exactly what. Then his natural arrogance reasserted itself. I think you'll find that money and influence trump mysterious threats, Mr. Darkmoor. Miss Ashford would be wise to consider my offer seriously. And you would be wise to withdraw it, Ash said quietly. Because if you ever approach her again with such an insulting proposition, I will take it very personally indeed. The two men stared at each other across the table, and Lydia could feel the tension crackling between them like electricity before a storm. She realized that this dinner had become something far more dangerous than they had originally planned. Ash was barely containing his demonic nature, and Marcus was beginning to see him as a legitimate threat. Perhaps we should go, she said quickly, standing before the situation could escalate further. An excellent idea, Ash agreed, rising gracefully. Mr. Blackthorne, thank you for the wine. I'm sure we'll be seeing each other again soon. The promise in those words made Marcus pale slightly, though he recovered quickly. I'm sure we will. Miss Ashford, I hope you'll reconsider my offer. It won't remain open indefinitely. She won't be reconsidering anything, Ash said with finality, placing a protective hand on Lydia's lower back. Good evening. As they walked away from the table, Lydia could feel Marcus's eyes boring into her back. The dinner had been a revelation in multiple ways. They now knew exactly what kind of man they were dealing with, and Marcus had seen enough of Ash's barely leashed power to take him seriously as an opponent. That went well, she muttered as they reached the restaurant's exit. Better than I expected, Ash replied, holding the door for her. He showed his true colors completely. Arrogant, entitled, and utterly without conscience. Destroying him is going to be even more satisfying than I anticipated. Did you see the way he looked at me? Like I was something he could buy? I saw. Ash's voice was deadly quiet. And that look will be the last mistake he ever makes. As they stepped into the cool night air, Lydia felt a mixture of relief and anticipation. The game was truly beginning now, and Marcus Blackthorne had no idea what kind of opponent he had chosen to make. Through their bond, she could feel Ash's dark satisfaction and something else. A fierce protectiveness that had nothing to do with their contract, and everything to do with the feelings growing between them. What's our next move? She asked as they walked toward Ash's car. Now we let him think he has the upper hand while we prepare his destruction, Ash replied, his smile sharp with anticipation. Marcus Blackthorne wants to play games of power and seduction? Then let's show him how those games are really played. Chapter 4, The Price of Vengeance. 2 months had passed since the disastrous dinner with Marcus, and their campaign against him was finally bearing fruit. Every carefully placed rumor, every strategic leak, every mysteriously failed business deal had worked together to create a web of destruction that was slowly tightening around their target. Marcus's company's stock had dropped by 30%. 3 major contracts had fallen through under suspicious circumstances, and whispers about his business ethics were beginning to circulate in the right circles. But as Lydia watched the man who had destroyed her family finally beginning to crumble, she found herself thinking less about revenge and more about the demon who had become the center of her world. Living with Ash had transformed her understanding of love itself. What had begun as a supernatural bond, forged in darkness, had evolved into something deeper and more complex than anything she had ever imagined possible. He was endlessly fascinating, ancient beyond mortal comprehension, yet somehow innocent in his curiosity about human nature. Powerful enough to level cities, yet gentle with her in ways that made her heart ache. Demonic in his capacity for cruelty toward their enemies, yet tender enough to hold her through nightmares and whisper comfort in languages that predated written history. This morning found them in their shared bed, sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse. Ash lay beside her, his true form partially visible in the early light, shadows that clung to his skin like living tattoos, eyes that held depths of gold and flame, an otherworldly beauty that should have terrified her but instead made her feel like the luckiest woman alive. "Marcus is meeting with his board of directors today," she murmured, tracing patterns on his chest with her fingertip. "The quarterly reports should be illuminating." His arm tightened around her, pulling her closer. "The beginning of the end for dear Marcus. Are you pleased?" "I should be," she replied, but even she could hear the uncertainty in her voice. Ash was quiet for a long moment, his fingers combing through her hair with hypnotic gentleness. "But you're not?" "I don't know what I am anymore." She tilted her head to look at him, and the understanding in his ancient eyes made her chest tight. "I wanted justice for so long, revenge consumed every thought I had. But now that it's happening, now you're discovering that vengeance is a cold companion compared to love," he finished softly. The word hung between them, unspoken until now, despite the emotion that had been growing stronger every day. Love. She loved him, this beautiful, dangerous creature who had bound himself to her destruction of another. And from the way his eyes softened, the way his hand trembled slightly against her cheek, she suspected he might love her too. "This complicates things," she whispered. "Everything about you has complicated my existence since the moment you summoned me," Ash replied, his thumb tracing across her lower lip. "I am a demon, Lydia. I have never experienced love before, never understood its power. But what I feel for you..." He paused, searching for words. "It burns brighter than hellfire and cuts deeper than any blade. What happens when Marcus is destroyed? When our bargain is complete?" The question she had been dreading seemed to hover in the air between them like a living thing. Ash's expression grew carefully neutral, but she could feel his turmoil through their bond, love and duty and ancient laws warring within him. "Your soul belongs to me," he said finally. "The contract is binding. But what does that mean exactly? Will I die? Will I become a demon? Will I just disappear?" Typically, a mortal soul taken to hell becomes less than it was. The essence remains, but the personality, the memories, the things that make you uniquely you fade until only a shadow remains. Horror crashed over her like a wave. "So I'll cease to exist as myself?" "That is the usual fate," Ash admitted, and she could feel his anguish through their bond even as he tried to keep his voice steady. "Then why did you make this bargain with me? Why didn't you tell me what would really happen?" "Because you were offering something I had never encountered before, a soul given freely for love rather than selfish gain. I wanted to possess that kind of pure devotion, even if I didn't understand it." His jaw clenched as he met her eyes. "And because I was arrogant enough to believe that your fate wouldn't matter to me once the contract was fulfilled. But it does matter to you now." "It matters more than my own existence," he said fiercely. "Lydia, if I could break the contract, if I could free you from our bargain, I would do it without hesitation. But the laws that govern demonic pacts are older than creation itself. I cannot simply release you because I've fallen in love." The raw honesty in his voice broke something open in her chest. "There has to be another way." "There might be," he said carefully. "But it would require a sacrifice I'm not certain I can ask you to make." "Tell me." Ash was quiet for so long that she wondered if he would answer at all. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "If you could find someone else to take your place willingly, someone who offered their soul in exchange for yours, the contract could be transferred." "Someone else? But who would?" Understanding hit her like a physical blow. "You? You're talking about giving up your own soul. Demons can forfeit their immortal essence under certain circumstances. If I were to offer my soul in place of yours, if I chose to become mortal and face whatever judgment awaits me." "No. The word tore from her throat with violent certainty. Absolutely not. I won't let you destroy yourself for me. It wouldn't be destruction, Ash protested. It would be transformation. I would become mortal, yes, but I would remain myself. We could have a life together, brief by my standards but infinitely precious. And what happens to your soul when you die as a mortal? Where do demons go for judgment? His silence was answer enough. Whatever fate awaited a demon who gave up his immortality was clearly nothing pleasant. I won't be responsible for condemning you, she said firmly. There has to be another option. Perhaps, he conceded reluctantly. But we may not have much time to explore alternatives. Marcus's destruction is nearly complete. When he falls, our bargain will be fulfilled, and I will be compelled to collect what is owed. The reminder sent ice through her veins. They had been so focused on revenge and their growing feelings for each other that she had almost forgotten about the ticking clock hanging over their heads. Every successful move against Marcus brought them closer to the moment when their contract would claim her soul. How long do we have? Days, perhaps a week at most. His board will vote him out today, and once that happens, his personal finances will collapse like dominoes. The man who destroyed your family will lose everything he values within 48 hours. And then? And then I take you to hell, and we hope that love is stronger than ancient law. The weight of their situation settled over her like a shroud. They had achieved everything she had wanted when she first summoned him. Marcus Blackthorne would be destroyed completely, his victims would have their justice, and her family would be safe from his predations. But the cost was higher than she had ever imagined. Not just her soul, but the love she had found in the most unlikely place imaginable. I don't regret summoning you, she said suddenly, needing him to know. Even knowing how this ends, I don't regret a single moment we've had together. Ash's eyes blazed with emotion as he pulled her closer, holding her as if she might disappear at any moment. Nor do I. You have given me something I never knew I wanted, the capacity to love. Whatever happens, that gift is beyond price. When he kissed her, it was with desperate intensity, as if he could somehow bind her to him through sheer force of will. She responded with equal fervor, pouring all her love and fear and fierce determination into the connection between them. Through their bond, she felt his emotions crash over her, love so powerful it made her dizzy, protectiveness that would move mountains, and underneath it all, a determination that matched her own. They were interrupted by the harsh ring of her phone. Marcus's name flashed on the screen, and they exchanged a glance before she answered. Hello? Her voice was steadier than she had expected. You did this. Marcus's voice was thick with rage and something that might have been panic. You and your mysterious friend. I don't know how, but you destroyed my company. I don't know what you're talking about, Lydia replied calmly. Don't lie to me. The board voted me out this morning. My personal accounts have been frozen. Every business contact I have is suddenly unavailable. This kind of coordinated assault doesn't happen by accident. Through their bond, she could feel Ash's dark satisfaction at Marcus's obvious distress. Their plan had worked even better than they had hoped. Maybe it's just karma finally catching up with you, she suggested sweetly. Karma? Marcus laughed bitterly. You naive little girl. Do you have any idea what you've unleashed? The forces you've chosen to align yourself with? Your friend Darkmoor isn't what he seems. What do you mean? I had him investigated after our dinner. Alexander Darkmoor doesn't exist. No birth records, no family history, no paper trail before 6 months ago. Either he's using an alias or... Marcus's voice dropped to a frightened whisper. Or he's something that shouldn't exist at all. A chill ran down Lydia's spine. If Marcus was beginning to suspect the truth about Ash's nature, their situation had just become infinitely more dangerous. You're paranoid, she said, but even she could hear the uncertainty in her voice. Am I? Tell me, Lydia, have you ever seen him during daylight? Really seen him? Have you ever watched him eat food or drink anything other than wine? Have you noticed that mirrors seem to avoid reflecting his face properly? Each question hit like a physical blow because they were all true. Ash cast no reflection, took no sustenance from human food, and avoided direct sunlight whenever possible. The signs had been there all along, but she had been too caught up in their mission and her growing feelings to pay attention. What you've summoned isn't human, Marcus continued, his voice growing more frantic. I don't know what it is, but I know it's dangerous. Whatever bargain you've made with it, whatever price you've agreed to pay, it will collect. These things always do. The line went dead, leaving her staring at the phone with growing dread. Beside her, Ash had gone very still, his expression unreadable. He knows, she whispered. He suspects, Ash corrected. But suspicion without proof is useless. Marcus Blackthorne is a ruined man grasping at supernatural explanations for his downfall, because he cannot accept responsibility for his own actions. But what if he tries to? To what? Go to the authorities with claims about demons and summoning circles? He would be laughed out of every police station in the city. Ash's smile was sharp with predatory confidence. Marcus is finished, Lydia. His power, his influence, his ability to hurt anyone, all of it is gone. He's just a broken man ranting about monsters in the dark. But even as Ash spoke the words, Lydia couldn't shake the feeling that Marcus's call was more than just the desperate ravings of a defeated enemy. There had been something in his voice, a certainty that suggested he knew more than he was saying. And if he truly understood what Ash was, if he somehow found a way to use that knowledge against them. The sound of glass breaking in the distance interrupted her thoughts, followed by what sounded like police sirens. Through the bond, she felt Ash's sudden alertness, his supernatural senses picking up something she couldn't detect. What is it? She asked. I'm not sure, he replied, moving to the window. But I believe our friend Marcus may have just made a very serious mistake. Chapter 5, Love Beyond Damnation. The news that Marcus Blackthorne had been found dead in his penthouse study reached them before dawn. According to the preliminary police reports, it appeared to be a suicide, a single gunshot wound to the head, powder burns consistent with self-infliction, and a note confessing to years of corporate fraud and personal corruption. The authorities found evidence of a massive embezzlement scheme that would likely take months to unravel, but which effectively destroyed any remaining sympathy for the deceased businessman. Lydia stared at the newspaper headline from the safety of Ash's arms, feeling strangely empty rather than victorious. Marcus Blackthorne was dead, his empire in ruins, his victims vindicated. She should have been celebrating, should have felt the fierce satisfaction of justice finally served. Instead, all she could think about was the binding contract that would now compel Ash to collect her soul. I didn't expect him to kill himself, she murmured against Ash's chest. Nor did I, he admitted, his fingers combing through her hair with gentle repetition. Though perhaps I should have. Men like Marcus cannot survive the complete destruction of their identity. When you strip away their power and influence, there's often nothing left worth preserving. Does it count? As fulfilling our bargain, I mean? His death by his own hand rather than mine? Ash was quiet for a moment, and she could feel his internal struggle through their bond. The contract specified his destruction, not the method. He is destroyed utterly, his life, his legacy, his power over others. Yes, I believe it counts. The finality in his voice made her stomach clench with dread. How long do we have? Until midnight tonight. When the sun sets on this day, I will be compelled to honor our agreement. 12 hours. They had 12 hours to find an alternative to a fate that would separate them forever. The thought made her want to curl up in his arms and never let go, to spend their remaining time together in desperate, futile denial of what was coming. Instead, she pulled away and fixed him with a determined stare. Then we need to find another solution. Now? Lydia? No. She stood and began pacing, her mind racing through possibilities. There has to be something we're missing. Some loophole or alternative or... She spun to face him, What about your offer to trade places with me? To give up your immortality? I told you, the fate that awaits a demon who becomes mortal is not something I would wish on anyone. What exactly happens? You've been vague about the details. Ash sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. When a demon voluntarily sacrifices their immortal essence, they face judgment for every sin committed during their existence. For someone like me, who has lived for millennia and done unspeakable things in service to hell, that judgment would be severe. Eternal torment? Eternal nothingness. Complete dissolution of the soul, as if I had never existed at all. The casual way he described his own annihilation made her chest tight with panic. Absolutely not. I won't let you destroy yourself for me. And I won't let you be dragged to hell to lose everything that makes you who you are, he replied with equal firmness. We're at an impasse, my love. My love. The endearment sent warmth through her even as their situation grew more desperate. At least he had finally said it aloud, finally admitted what they both felt. Wait, she said suddenly, a new thought occurring to her. What if we modified the contract somehow? Added conditions or clauses that change the terms? Demonic contracts cannot be altered once sealed with blood and power. The binding is absolute. But what if we created a new contract that superseded the old one? Ash frowned, considering the possibility. It would require a bargain of equal or greater value. Your soul for Marcus's destruction is a significant pact. What could you offer that would be worth more? Lydia's mind raced, considering and discarding possibilities. Money meant nothing to a creature who could create wealth with a thought. Power was already his by birthright. Knowledge, pleasures, influence, all worthless to someone of his ancient experience. What could a mortal possibly offer that would tempt a prince of hell to renegotiate? What do demons value most? She asked. Soul's power, the corruption of innocence, the usual dark desires. No, what do you value most? Not demons in general, but you specifically. Ash was quiet for a long moment, his golden eyes searching her face. You, he said finally. The only thing I value above all else is you. Then that's our answer. Excitement began to build in her chest as the plan took shape. What if I offered something more valuable than my soul? What if I offered my love? I don't understand. You said yourself that what we have is unprecedented. A mortal who loves a demon freely, without coercion or supernatural influence. What if that love, freely given, is worth more than a soul given in desperation? Ash's eyes widened as he began to understand her reasoning. You want to make a new bargain. Your love in exchange for your freedom. Not just my love, Lydia continued, the idea gaining momentum. My choice to stay with you willingly. To bind myself to you not through demonic contract, but through human decision. To choose you over heaven or hell, or whatever afterlife awaits me. It's... Ash paused, clearly struggling with the concept. I don't know if such a bargain would be considered valid by infernal law. Love given freely has no price because it cannot be bought or traded. But the choice to bind myself to you? To willingly become whatever I need to become to be with you forever? That has value, doesn't it? Immeasurable value, he admitted. But Lydia, you would be choosing to damn yourself voluntarily. To give up any chance of redemption or peaceful rest. I would be choosing you, she corrected. I would be choosing love over safety, over the promise of some theoretical paradise I've never seen. I would be choosing us. Ash stared at her for a long moment, and she could feel his emotions through their bond, hope and love and desperate longing warring with protectiveness and fear for her immortal soul. You don't know what you're asking, he said finally. To bind yourself to a demon is to accept darkness as part of your nature. You would change, become something other than purely human. I've already changed, Lydia pointed out. Living with you, loving you, experiencing the world through our bond, I'm not the same person who summoned you 3 months ago. And I don't want to be. The corruption would accelerate if we were bound by choice rather than contract. You would develop abilities, perhaps even immortality, but you would also become capable of cruelties that your human nature currently prevents. Would you still love me if I changed? Always, he replied without hesitation. No matter what you became, I would love you. Then I accept the risk. She moved closer, taking his hands in hers. Ash, I've spent months watching you struggle with your demonic nature while showing me kindness and protection and love. If you can choose to be more than your darkness, then I can learn to embrace mine. And if the infernal courts reject our new bargain? If they insist on honoring the original contract? Then at least we tried, she said simply. At least we fought for each other, instead of accepting defeat. Ash pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly against his chest. Through their bond, she felt his decision crystallize, love overcoming caution, hope triumphing over ancient certainty. Very well, he murmured against her hair. We attempt to renegotiate with forces that have never been successfully challenged. We propose a bargain based on love rather than desperation. We ask the courts of hell to accept that freely given devotion has greater value than a soul claimed by contract. How do we do it? The same way you summoned me originally. With ritual, with power, and with absolute conviction in what we're offering. He pulled back to meet her eyes. But this time, we call upon powers even older than demonic law. We invoke the right of true love to transcend all other bonds. Does such a right exist? In theory. Love is the one force in all creation that hell has never been able to corrupt or control completely. If any power could override a demonic contract, it would be love freely chosen and publicly declared. They spent the remaining hours preparing for the most important ritual of their lives. Ash taught her the ancient words that would call upon primordial forces, the gestures that would shape their offering into something the infernal courts couldn't ignore. Together, they created a new summoning circle, not to call forth a demon this time, but to petition the very foundations of cosmic law. As midnight approached, they stood together in the center of the circle, hands clasped and hearts united. The candles flickered with otherworldly light, and shadows danced with anticipation around them. Are you certain? Ash asked one final time. Once we begin, there will be no turning back. I've never been more certain of anything in my life, Lydia replied. I love you, Asmodeus. I choose you, whatever the cost. His kiss was desperate and tender, filled with centuries of loneliness and the promise of forever. When they finally separated, both were glowing with power that transcended human or demon. Then let us rewrite the laws of damnation itself, Ash said, and began to speak words that had never been spoken in mortal realms. The circle erupted in light and shadow, and cosmic forces that had shaped reality since the beginning of time turned their attention to two souls bound by impossible love. In that moment, Lydia knew that whatever happened next, they would face it together. As one. Forever. Epilogue. 5 years later, the woman who had once been merely human sat in a garden that existed between dimensions, watching her beloved tend flowers that bloomed with starlight. Their bargain had been accepted, their love acknowledged as a force powerful enough to rewrite the fundamental laws of existence. She had become something new, neither fully human nor demon, but a being of pure choice and devotion. The darkness within her was real, as was the capacity for cruelty that came with her transformation. But love had taught her to choose light even in the depths of shadow, just as it had taught him to find redemption in the arms of mortal affection. They ruled a small realm of their own now, a pocket of reality where other impossible loves could find sanctuary. And sometimes, when desperate souls called out for justice and vengeance, they would answer together, teaching that the greatest victory was not destroying one's enemies, but choosing love over hate, hope over despair, and each other over everything else the cosmos had to offer. Some might call it damnation. They called it home.
Hellfire Heart, A Love That Burns Eternal. By Crimson Veil. Chapter 1, Infernal Awakening. The flames that danced across Serafina's fingertips had once terrified her. Now, as she stood on the precipice of the obsidian cliffs overlooking the mortal realm, they felt like old friends whispering secrets only she could understand. The fire within her soul had awakened 3 moons ago, marking her transformation from ordinary village healer to something far more dangerous, a hellborn, one of the cursed children caught between worlds. Below her, the human settlement of Ashweck slumbered peacefully, its thatched roofs and cobblestone streets bathed in silver moonlight. The mortals had no idea that creatures like her walked among them, beings whose very existence defied the natural order. They lived their simple lives of love and loss, birth and death, never knowing that immortal forces constantly battled for dominion over their souls. Serafina had been one of them, until the night everything changed. She remembered the fever that had consumed her for 7 days, the visions of burning cities and weeping angels, the moment she had awakened to find her beloved mentor Sister Margaret reduced to ash at her bedside. The fire had claimed her first victim, before she even understood what she had become. The hellborn gift was both blessing and curse. She could heal mortal wounds with a touch, but that same touch could ignite flesh like dry kindling. She could see into the depths of human hearts, perceiving their deepest desires and darkest secrets, but the knowledge was often too terrible to bear. Most devastating of all, she was condemned to watch everyone she had ever loved age and die while she remained frozen in the moment of her transformation, eternally young and eternally alone. "You're brooding again." The voice came from behind her, deep and rich like aged wine. Serafina didn't need to turn to know who spoke. She had been sensing his presence for weeks now, a dark warmth that seemed to follow her wherever she went. He was hunting her, though she wasn't certain whether as predator or protector. "I'm contemplating," she replied without turning. "There's a difference." Dante stepped beside her, his tall frame cutting an imposing silhouette against the starlit sky. His dark hair caught the moonlight, and she could see the familiar amber glow that flickered in his eyes when his own demonic nature stirred close to the surface. He was beautiful in the way that dangerous things often were, sharp angles and smooth planes that promised both pleasure and pain. Contemplating what, exactly? He folded his arms across his chest, the movement causing his black coat to fall open and reveal the intricate tattoos that covered his skin. Each mark told a story of battles fought in the depths of hell, souls claimed and prices paid for power beyond mortal comprehension. Whether the humans below deserve the protection I've been trying to give them. Serafina finally looked at him, noting how the hellfire in his eyes seemed to burn brighter when their gazes met. Or whether they deserve what's coming for them. Dante's expression darkened. "The Crimson Order has found you." It wasn't a question. Serafina had been running from the Order for months, ever since they had marked her as an abomination to be destroyed. The ancient organization of demon hunters had existed since the first Hellborn walked the earth, dedicated to maintaining the barrier between the mortal world and the infernal realms. To them, she represented everything they had sworn to eliminate: supernatural power unchecked by divine authority, chaos masquerading as compassion. "They burned down the orphanage yesterday," she said quietly. 23 children died because they thought I might be hiding there. I wasn't, but they didn't know that. They didn't care." Dante moved closer, and she could feel the heat radiating from his skin. All Hellborn ran warmer than mortals, their internal fires never fully banked, but Dante burned like a forge. It should have been uncomfortable, but instead, Serafina found herself drawn to that warmth like a moth to flame. "The Order believes that collateral damage is acceptable if it serves the greater good," he said. "They've been telling themselves that lie for 1,000 years. And what do you believe?" Serafina turned to face him fully, studying the sharp planes of his face. She had been trying to understand him ever since their paths had first crossed, but Dante remained an enigma wrapped in shadow and flame. He was clearly older and more powerful than her, his demonic heritage running deeper and darker, yet he had never tried to claim dominion over her as other Hellborn did with their lessers. "I believe," Dante said slowly, reaching out to trace the air just inches from her cheek without quite touching, "that the only thing more dangerous than a demon is a demon with nothing left to lose." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Serafina knew he was right. The Order had taken everything from her, her human life, her calling as a healer, her chance at normal love and companionship. All that remained was the fire inside her, and the growing certainty that she would have to choose sides in a war she had never wanted to fight. "They'll come for you too, if they haven't already," she said. "Simply for being near me." Dante's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Let them come. I've been dancing with the Order for longer than you've been alive, little flame. They know better than to corner a creature like me." The endearment sent an unexpected thrill through her. No one had called her anything but monster or abomination since her transformation. To hear such gentleness from someone who understood exactly what she was felt like absolution and damnation rolled into one. "Why are you here, Dante?" she asked. "Really? You could have your pick of companions among our kind. Ancient ones with power to match your own. Why follow a newly awakened hellborn who brings nothing but trouble?" He was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than she had ever heard it, almost vulnerable. "Because when I look at you, I see someone worth saving. And I haven't felt that way about anyone in 3 centuries. The admission hit her like a physical blow. Serafina had spent months believing herself beyond redemption, a creature of destruction masquerading as something benevolent. To hear that someone, especially someone like Dante, saw worth in her shattered something inside her chest and rebuilt it stronger. "I don't know how to be saved," she whispered. "Then perhaps," Dante said, finally closing the distance between them and cupping her face in his hands, "we can learn together." His touch was fire against fire, and for the first time since her transformation, Serafina didn't feel alone. The warmth that spread through her had nothing to do with their supernatural natures, and everything to do with the recognition she saw in his amber eyes. Here was someone who understood the weight of carrying hell inside your heart, who knew what it meant to be forever caught between salvation and damnation. When he kissed her, it was with the desperate hunger of a man who had wandered the desert for years and finally found an oasis. Serafina kissed him back with equal fervor, pouring all her loneliness and longing into the connection between them. Their combined heat could have melted stone, but instead it forged something new, a bond that transcended their demonic heritage and touched something deeper. They broke apart breathing hard, foreheads pressed together as they stared into each other's eyes. The hellfire that normally flickered in their gazes had settled into a steady, warming glow that spoke of peace rather than destruction. "The Order will never stop hunting us," Serafina said. "Then we'll have to make sure they never catch us," Dante replied, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheekbone. "But first we need to get you somewhere safe. There are others like us, hellborn who have chosen to fight back rather than hide. They have a sanctuary in the Shadowlands where the Order cannot follow." Others. Hope bloomed in Serafina's chest like a flower in winter. She had thought herself unique in her misery, the only creature caught between worlds. Dozens of them. Each with their own story of transformation, their own reasons for defying both heaven and hell. Dante's smile was gentle now, free of its earlier sharp edges. "You're not alone, Serafina. You never were." As they stood together on the cliff's edge, looking out over the sleeping world below, Serafina felt something she hadn't experienced since her transformation began: hope. The fire in her heart still burned, but it no longer felt like a curse. With Dante beside her and the promise of others like them ahead, it felt like a beacon guiding her toward a future she had never dared imagine. The war between the Crimson Order and the Hellborn was far from over, and she knew that pain and loss still lay ahead. But for the first time in months, Serafina believed she might survive it. More than survive, she might actually find a way to thrive. The flames that danced across her fingers as she took Dante's hand weren't weapons of destruction anymore. They were promises of protection, of warmth in the darkness, of a love that could burn eternal without consuming everything in its path. Together, they stepped back from the precipice and began their journey toward whatever sanctuary awaited. Behind them, the human world slumbered on, unaware that two creatures of legend had just chosen love over vengeance, hope over despair. The real story, Serafina realized, was just beginning. Chapter 2, Sanctuary of Shadows. The Shadowlands existed in the space between spaces, where reality grew thin and the laws of physics bent like reeds in an otherworldly wind. Serafina felt the transition as they passed through the veil, a sensation like stepping from blazing sunlight into cool water, her skin tingling with energies that had no name in mortal tongues. The path Dante led her along seemed to shift and change with each step, mountains becoming valleys, becoming forests of trees that grew silver leaves and bore fruit like captured starlight. "It's beautiful," she breathed, watching as a flock of birds with wings of living flame soared overhead, their song a harmony that touched something deep in her soul. "The Shadowlands reflect the nature of those who dwell within them," Dante explained, his hand warm and steady in hers. "Our sanctuary exists here because we've chosen to make it a place of refuge, rather than conquest. The realm responds to that intention." They crested a hill covered in grass that shimmered like emeralds, and Serafina gasped at the sight that greeted them. Below stretched a city unlike anything she had ever imagined, spires of crystallized shadow reaching toward a sky painted in impossible purples and golds, buildings that seemed to grow organically from the earth itself, their walls pulsing gently with inner light. Gardens bloomed everywhere, filled with flowers that existed only in dreams, and fountains that sang with voices like angels. "Welcome to Infernia," Dante said, pride evident in his voice. "The last free city of the Hellborn." As they descended toward the city gates, Serafina began to see the inhabitants of this miraculous place. They were like her and Dante, beautiful and terrible, bearing the marks of their infernal heritage with dignity rather than shame. A woman with skin like polished obsidian and hair of living flame tended a garden where roses bloomed in shades of midnight. A man whose eyes held the depth of starless nights worked at a forge, shaping metal that rang like music under his hammer. Children who bore the golden glow of newly awakened power played in the streets, their laughter creating small auroras in the air around them. "How many?" Serafina asked, overwhelmed by the sight of so many of her kind living in apparent harmony. "Nearly 300 at last count," Dante replied. "Some are refugees like yourself, fleeing the Order's persecution. Others were born here, children of unions between Hellborn. A few are ancient ones who remember the first days, after the barrier between worlds was established." They passed through gates wrought from what looked like crystallized moonlight, guarded by sentries whose mere presence radiated power. One of them, a tall woman with silver hair braided with small bones, nodded respectfully to Dante. "Lord Dante," she said, her voice carrying the echo of distant thunder. "The council has been expecting you. They've prepared chambers for your companion." "Thank you, Nyx." Dante squeezed Serafina's hand reassuringly. "We'll present ourselves to the council shortly. First, I'd like to show Serafina the sanctuary proper." The woman called Nyx studied Serafina with eyes like chips of winter sky. Serafina felt exposed under that gaze, as if every secret and fear was being catalogued and weighed. Finally, Nyx smiled, an expression that transformed her austere features into something almost maternal. "Welcome, sister," she said. "May you find here what you seek." As they walked deeper into the city, Dante explained the society that had grown up in their hidden refuge. "We govern ourselves through a council of 7, each representing different aspects of our nature: war, wisdom, healing, art, protection, justice, and love. I serve as the voice of protection, which is why I was chosen to seek you out." "You were chosen?" Serafina looked at him in surprise. "This wasn't chance then? Our meeting?" Dante's expression grew troubled. "We have seers among us, Hellborn, whose gifts allow them to peer through the veils of time. They saw visions of a great upheaval coming, a war that would determine the fate of both our kind and the mortal world. In those visions, you featured prominently." A chill ran down Serafina's spine, despite the warmth of the realm around them. "What did they see?" "Many possibilities," Dante said carefully. "In some futures, you stand as a beacon of hope, uniting our scattered people against the Order's final crusade. In others..." He trailed off, clearly reluctant to continue. "In others..." Serafina pressed. "In others, your power consumes everything, mortal and immortal alike, leaving nothing but ash and shadow." Dante stopped walking and turned to face her, his hands coming up to frame her face. "But I don't believe those visions," represent inevitability. I believe they show us what could happen if we make the wrong choices. The weight of prophecy settled on Serafina's shoulders like a leaden cloak. She had spent months simply trying to survive, to find some way to live with the fire that burned inside her. The idea that her choices might determine the fate of worlds was almost too much to bear. "What if I'm not strong enough?" she whispered. "What if the darkness inside me is too great?" "Then we'll face it together," Dante said firmly. "You're not alone anymore, Serafina. Whatever comes, you have people who will stand with you." They were interrupted by the approach of a young man, whose appearance made Serafina's breath catch. He was beautiful in the way that only the Hellborn could be, but there was something different about him. An otherworldly quality that spoke of power beyond even their supernatural norm. His hair was white as fresh snow, his skin pale as moonlight, and his eyes held depths that seemed to contain entire galaxies. "Brother Dante," the young man said, his voice carrying harmonics that made the air itself seem to sing. "The council grows impatient. And our guest?" His gaze settled on Serafina, and she felt as if she were being examined by something far older and more vast than his youthful appearance suggested. "Our guest burns brighter than the visions foretold." "Serafina," Dante said, "allow me to present Lucian, our voice of wisdom and the one whose visions guided me to you." Lucian inclined his head gracefully. "Lady Serafina, your arrival fulfills prophecies that have guided our people for generations. There is much we need to discuss." "Prophecies," Serafina repeated, feeling increasingly overwhelmed. "Everyone keeps mentioning prophecies. I'm just one person. I don't understand how I could be so important." Lucian and Dante exchanged a meaningful look before Lucian spoke again. "Perhaps it would be better to show you. The council chambers contain archives that detail the history of our kind, from the very beginning. Once you understand where we come from, you'll better comprehend where we're going." They made their way through streets that hummed with life and purpose. Serafina saw workshops where Hellborn artisans crafted objects of impossible beauty, schools where young ones learned to control their developing powers, and markets where traders dealt in goods from across multiple realms. It was a functioning society, complete and self-sustaining, built by people who had been told they were monsters but had chosen to be something more. The council chambers occupied the heart of the city, a magnificent structure that seemed to have been grown rather than built. Its walls pulsed gently with veins of light that shifted through every color of the spectrum, and its soaring ceilings disappeared into misty heights that suggested infinite space above. Inside, the other members of the council waited, 6 beings of such presence and power that Serafina felt humbled just standing in their vicinity. There was Marcus, voice of war, whose scarred frame spoke of countless battles fought in defense of their people. Elena, voice of healing, whose touch could restore life itself but whose eyes held the weight of all the pain she had absorbed. Arya, voice of art, around whom reality seemed to bend into more beautiful configurations. Thorn, voice of justice, whose very presence made Serafina feel as if every secret sin was known and weighed. And finally, Cordelia, voice of love, whose smile held such warmth and acceptance that Serafina felt tears prick her eyes. "Welcome, child," Cordelia said, rising from her seat to embrace Serafina like a long-lost daughter. "We have waited so long for your arrival." "I don't understand," Serafina said as the embrace ended, leaving her feeling somehow blessed. "Everyone speaks as if they know me, but I've never been here before. I didn't even know places like this existed, until today." "Sit," Elena said gently, gesturing to an empty chair that materialized from the living stone of the floor. "Let us tell you a story. The story of our people, and why your awakening marks the beginning of everything." Serafina settled into the chair, acutely aware of Dante taking his place among the council members, while maintaining his protective focus on her. The chamber dimmed around them, and images began to form in the air, pictures painted in light and shadow that moved and breathed with life. "In the beginning," Lucian began, his voice taking on the cadence of ritual recitation, "there was only the void, endless darkness without form or purpose. Then came the first light, what mortals call creation, which divided existence into realms. The celestial sphere for beings of pure spirit and divine will. The mortal realm for creatures of flesh and brief lives. and the infernal depths, for those who embodied passion and power without restraint. The images showed the birth of these realms, cosmic forces beyond imagination, shaping reality according to divine plan. Serafina watched angels of impossible beauty take their places in paradise, while demons of terrible majesty claimed dominion over shadows and flame. For eons these realms existed in perfect separation, Lucian continued. But separation breeds stagnation, and the cosmic forces that shaped existence began to seek new expressions of their power. Some angels fell, consumed by pride or curiosity. Some mortals ascended, elevated by heroism or sacrifice. And some demons found redemption, choosing love over hate, creation over destruction. The images shifted to show the first hellborn, beings caught between worlds, bearing the mark of the infernal but choosing to walk paths of light. They were beautiful and terrible, powerful beyond mortal comprehension, but guided by conscience and compassion. The first hellborn were few in number but mighty indeed. Elena took up the narrative. They served as bridges between realms, healers who could touch both the celestial and infernal aspects of existence. They brought knowledge to mortals, offered redemption to demons, and reminded angels that perfection without growth was its own form of hell. But the cosmic order was not pleased with these bridge builders, Marcus added, his voice rough with old anger. Heaven and hell alike declared the hellborn to be abominations, creatures whose very existence threatened the purity of divine plan. They were hunted, persecuted, driven into hiding. The images now showed scenes of devastation, hellborn cities burning, families torn apart, children murdered for the crime of their mixed heritage. Serafina watched in horror, as beings who looked like her and Dante were systematically destroyed by armies of angels and demons working in unholy alliance. The survivors went into hiding, Thorn continued, scattered across the realms, living in shadows and secrecy. Some chose to suppress their nature entirely, living as mortals and allowing their children to forget their heritage. Others retreated to places like this, building sanctuaries where they could exist without persecution. For 1,000 years this was our existence, Arya said sadly. Hiding, surviving, hoping that someday the persecution would end. But prophecy spoke of a time when the barriers between realms would weaken, when the cosmic order itself would face challenges that only united Hellborn could address. That time is now, Cordelia said, her warm voice heavy with portent. The Crimson Order grows in power and fanaticism, seeking not just to destroy individual Hellborn, but to complete the genocide their predecessors began. At the same time, ancient evils stir in the infernal depths, being so consumed by hatred and destruction that they make common demons seem like angels by comparison. And in the celestial sphere, Lucian added, certain factions have decided that the mortal realm is too corrupted to save. They prepare to cleanse it entirely, destroying billions of innocent lives in pursuit of cosmic purity. Serafina felt sick as the implications sank in. You're saying that all three realms are preparing for war? Not preparing, Dante said quietly. Already fighting. What you've experienced at the hands of the Order is just the beginning. The real war will determine whether the realms continue to exist separately, or whether everything collapses into chaos. And the prophecies say, I have a role in this? Serafina's voice came out smaller than she intended. The prophecies speak of a Hellborn who will arise with power beyond any seen since the first days, Lucian said. One who could unite our scattered people, break the barriers between realms, and forge a new cosmic order based on balance rather than separation. Or, he continued, his starlight eyes filled with sorrow, one whose unchecked power could consume everything, reducing all existence to ash and void. Serafina sat in stunned silence, trying to process the magnitude of what she had learned. The fire that burned inside her wasn't just personal affliction, it was cosmic potential, capable of creation or destruction on a scale she could barely comprehend. Why me? She finally asked. I'm not even fully trained in my abilities. I've been Hellborn for only months. Surely there are others more qualified. Power alone doesn't determine destiny, Cordelia said gently. Character does. The visions show not just what you could do, but who you are. You've spent these months of awakening using your gifts to heal and protect, even when it brought danger upon yourself. You've chosen love over hate, hope over despair. That's why we believe you're the one the prophecies speak of. But belief isn't certainty, Dante added, moving to kneel beside her chair and take her hands in his. Whatever the prophecies say, you still have choices to make. We can offer you training, support, and alliance, but ultimately you must decide what kind of future you want to help create. Serafina looked around the circle of faces, powerful beings who had placed their hopes in her despite having just met her. The weight of their expectations was almost crushing, but underneath it she felt something else, belonging. For the first time since her transformation, she was surrounded by people who truly understood what she was and what she faced. If I agree to this, she said slowly, if I accept the role prophecy has cast for me, what happens next? Training, Marcus said immediately. Your power is immense but unfocused. We can teach you to channel it with precision, rather than allowing it to burn wild. Education, Elena added. You need to understand the full scope of what's coming, the players involved, the stakes at risk. Alliance building, Thorn contributed. There are other sanctuary cities, other hellborn communities that need to be contacted and convinced to stand together. And time, Lucian finished. The final confrontation is still years away. We have time to prepare, to grow stronger, to gather the forces we'll need. Serafina closed her eyes, feeling the fire inside her respond to her heightened emotions. But instead of the wild destructive force it had been, the flame felt purposeful. As if it too understood that this was a moment of choosing. When she opened her eyes again, she found Dante watching her with an expression of love so profound it took her breath away. Whatever she decided, she realized, he would stand with her. That knowledge gave her the courage to speak. I'll do it, she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. I'll train, I'll learn, I'll help unite our people. But I have conditions. The council members leaned forward, interested. No one else dies because of me if I can prevent it, Serafina said firmly. And we don't just prepare for war, we work toward peace. If I'm truly going to help forge a new cosmic order, it won't be one built on the ashes of the old. It'll be one where all beings, mortal and immortal alike, can coexist. Cordelia smiled, her face radiant with approval. Now I know why the prophecies chose you. As the council began discussing practical matters, training schedules, resource allocation, diplomatic missions, Serafina felt a strange sense of peace settle over her. The road ahead would be difficult, perhaps impossible. But she was no longer facing it alone. The hellfire in her heart burned steady and warm, no longer a curse but a promise. Whatever came next, she would meet it with love in her heart and the most powerful beings in existence standing at her side. The real war was coming, but so was hope. And for the first time since her awakening, Serafina believed that hope might be enough to save them all. Chapter 3, Trials by Fire. The training grounds of Infernia existed in a pocket dimension, where the rules of reality could be adjusted to accommodate the dangerous education of beings, whose power could reshape worlds. Serafina stood at the center of a crystalline amphitheater, sweat beading on her forehead as she faced her newest challenge, containing the hellfire that wanted to consume everything in a mile radius. Focus, Marcus commanded from the sidelines, his scarred face impassive despite the waves of heat radiating from her position. Power without control is just destruction waiting to happen. Feel the fire, understand its nature, but don't let it command you. Easier said than done. For 3 weeks, Serafina had been training with each member of the council, learning to harness abilities she was only beginning to understand. The sessions with Marcus were the most physically demanding, pushing her to find the balance between restraint and release that would allow her to use her powers in actual combat. But today felt different. The fire inside her burned hotter and more insistently than ever before, as if responding to some cosmic call she couldn't hear. I can't hold it, she gasped, feeling the flames trying to escape through every pore of her skin. The crystalline walls around her began to glow cherry red, and she heard the sharp crack of heat expansion even through the magical protections. You can, a familiar voice said, and suddenly Dante was there beside her, his own internal fire rising to meet hers. Instead of the explosive combination she expected, their flames seemed to harmonize, creating a stable vortex of controlled energy that no longer threatened to break free. Together, he murmured, his hand finding hers. Remember, you're not fighting this alone anymore. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She had been trying to contain her power through force of will, wrestling with it like an enemy to be subdued. But Dante was right, she wasn't alone, and her fire didn't have to be isolated either. She reached out with her senses, feeling for the other sources of infernal energy around her. Marcus's flame burned steady and disciplined, honed by centuries of warfare into a precise weapon. Elena's fire was tempered by compassion, a gentle warmth that healed rather than harmed. Each member of the council, each resident of Infernia, carried their own version of the hellfire that defined their nature. Instead of fighting her own flame, Serafina began to weave it into the greater tapestry of power that surrounded her. The effect was immediate and profound. Her fire settled into a controlled burn that she could shape and direct with thought alone. The crystalline walls stopped glowing, the air cooled to merely warm instead of scorching, and for the first time since her awakening, Serafina felt truly in command of her abilities. "Excellent," Marcus said, and the approval in his voice was worth a month of lesser accomplishments. "Now you begin to understand what it means to be part of something greater than yourself." The training session ended, but Serafina remained in the amphitheater with Dante, practicing the new harmonic techniques they had discovered. It was intoxicating to work with someone whose power complemented her own so perfectly, their combined energies creating effects neither could achieve alone. "How did you know?" she asked as they sat together on the crystal steps, sharing the comfortable exhaustion that came after productive work. "How did you know that connecting our flames would stabilize rather than amplify them?" Dante was quiet for a long moment, his amber eyes distant with memory. "Because that's how it was with my first partner," he said finally. "The one I lost to the Order 3 centuries ago." Serafina felt a stab of something that might have been jealousy, if it weren't so mixed with sympathy. "Tell me about her." "His name was Gabriel," Dante corrected gently. "He was extraordinary. A hellborn like us, but one who had retained more of his celestial heritage than most. He could work miracles that would have made the angels weep with envy, but he used that power to protect mortal children and heal the sick." The pain in Dante's voice was still fresh despite the centuries that had passed. Serafina took his hand, offering what comfort she could through their connection. "We were partners in every sense," Dante continued. "Lovers, warriors, healers. We built a sanctuary much like this one, a place where our kind could live without fear. For 50 years we thought we had found paradise. What happened? The Order found us. Not the modern Crimson Order, their predecessors, the Purifiers. They were more thorough in their methods. They didn't just kill Gabriel, they unmade him. Used celestial weapons to unravel his very essence so that not even his soul would survive to find peace in whatever afterlife awaits our kind." Serafina's blood ran cold. She had known the Order was dangerous, but the idea that they possessed weapons capable of destroying souls was almost incomprehensible. "That's why the harmony between our fires matters so much," Dante said, his thumb tracing patterns across her knuckles. "Gabriel taught me that power shared is not power divided, it's power multiplied. But it only works with perfect trust, perfect connection. If there's any discord between partners, the harmonic effect becomes destructive rather than constructive." "And you trust me that completely?" Serafina asked, awed by the implication. Dante turned to face her fully, his expression more serious than she had ever seen it. "I love you, Serafina. Not just as a partner or ally, but as the other half of my soul that I thought I'd lost forever. Yes, I trust you completely. The question is whether you trust me the same way." The words hung between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. Serafina felt the truth of her own feelings crystallizing, all the confusion and uncertainty of the past weeks resolving into perfect clarity. "I do," she said simply. "I love you too, Dante. And I trust you with everything I am." When he kissed her this time, it was different from their first desperate connection on the cliff. This was a claiming, a promise, a vow spoken in the language of fire and soul. Their flames merged and danced around them, creating patterns of light that spoke of harmony achieved and power shared. When they finally broke apart, Serafina felt fundamentally changed, not just by the kiss, but by the recognition that she was no longer a single being but part of something greater. "The council will want to know about this development," Dante said, though he made no move to leave her side. "Why?" "Because bonded pairs are incredibly rare among our kind, and they represent the pinnacle of hellborn power. If the prophecies are true, and you're meant to unite our people, having a true partner will make that infinitely more possible." Their intimate moment was interrupted by the arrival of Lucian, whose starlight eyes held an urgency that immediately put them both on alert. "Forgive the intrusion," the young seer said, "but there are developments you both need to know about immediately." They followed him through the city to the council chambers, where the other members had already assembled around a crystalline viewing sphere that showed images from the mortal realm. Serafina gasped at what she saw. Ashwick, the village where she had once served as a healer, was burning. But these weren't natural flames, they were the cold white fire of celestial weapons, consuming everything they touched without leaving even ash behind. "The order?" Dante asked grimly. "Worse," Elena said, her healing nature visibly distressed by the destruction they were witnessing. "Angels. A full heavenly host has descended to cleanse what they call the corruption from that region. They're not just hunting hellborn anymore, they're eliminating any mortal who might have been influenced by our presence." Serafina watched in horror as beings of impossible beauty and terrible purpose swept through the streets, their weapons reducing homes, shops, and people to nothingness. Children who had once brought her wildflowers as thanks for healing their scraped knees simply ceased to exist as the divine flames touched them. "We have to stop this," she said, flames beginning to flicker around her hands. "With what forces?" Marcus asked bluntly. "We have 300 hellborn in this sanctuary. They have a host of battle angels numbering in the thousands. It would be suicide." "Then we find allies," Serafina said fiercely. "You said there are other sanctuaries, other communities of our people. We unite them, we gather our strength, and we show both heaven and hell that we won't be eliminated quietly." "That could take months," Arya pointed out. "By then, how many mortal communities will have been cleansed?" "So we buy time," Dante said, understanding immediately what Serafina was thinking. "Small strikes, rescue missions, anything to slow down their advance while we build the coalition we need." "It's incredibly dangerous," Cordelia warned. "If you're captured, if they realize who you are." "They already know who I am," Serafina said. "The Order has been hunting me for months. At least this way I'm fighting back instead of just running." Thorn leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. "There is precedent for this kind of resistance. During the first purges, small groups of hellborn managed to save thousands of mortals through hit-and-run tactics. It won't stop the hosts, but it could limit the damage while we work toward a larger solution." "And," Lucian added quietly, "the prophecies speak of a time when the hellborn would emerge from shadows to stand openly against persecution. This could be the beginning of that emergence." The debate continued for hours, but Serafina barely heard it. Her mind was filled with images of burning children, of innocent lives extinguished by beings who claimed to represent divine justice. When the council finally voted to support limited resistance operations while pursuing larger alliance-building efforts, she felt a grim satisfaction settle over her. "When do we leave?" she asked. "We?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Dante and I," Serafina clarified. "You said bonded pairs represent the pinnacle of hellborn power. If that's true, then we're your best chance of actually making a difference out there." "You've had 3 weeks of training," Elena protested. "You're powerful, but you're not ready for direct combat with angels." "Then we'll have to learn fast," Dante said, his support unwavering. "Because Serafina is right, we can't sit here in safety while innocents die." The preparations took 2 days. Serafina received crash courses in combat applications for her abilities, while Dante reviewed intelligence about angelic tactics and weaknesses. They were outfitted with weapons and armor crafted from materials that existed only in the Shadowlands, items that could channel and focus their hellfire without being destroyed by it. On the morning of their departure, the entire population of Infernia gathered to see them off. It was humbling to realize that so many people were placing their hopes in her and Dante, but it was also empowering. She was no longer the frightened, isolated girl who had fled her burning village. She was a member of a community, part of something greater than herself. "Remember," Cordelia said as she embraced them both, "you're not trying to win the war in a single battle. Save who you can, learn what you can, and come back to us safely. The diplomatic missions to other sanctuaries begin tomorrow," Thorne added. "If all goes well, you'll have significant reinforcements within a month." "And if the visions prove accurate," Lucian said, his starlight eyes focusing on something beyond the present moment, "this mission will teach you things about your true nature that no amount of training could provide." As they stepped through the portal that would take them back to the mortal realm, Serafina felt the weight of destiny settling on her shoulders once again. But this time, she wasn't facing it alone. Dante's hand was firm in hers, their flames were synchronized in perfect harmony, and somewhere behind them, 300 Hellborn were working to build the future they were fighting for. The war might be cosmic in scope, but it would be won or lost through individual choices, one battle at a time. And this battle, the fight to protect innocent lives from divine genocide, was one Serafina was prepared to give everything to win. The hellfire in her heart burned steady and true, as they emerged into a world under siege. Whatever came next, she would meet it as part of something greater than herself, armed with love that had survived death and power that could reshape reality itself. The real test of the prophecies was about to begin. Chapter 4, Heart of the Storm. The mortal realm had changed in the month since Serafina and Dante had left Infernia. Where once green fields had stretched toward distant horizons, now blackened earth bore testimony to the passage of heavenly hosts. The very air tasted of ash and sorrow, and the few survivors they encountered bore the hollow-eyed look of people who had seen the impossible, made terrifyingly real. They moved like ghosts through the devastated landscape, following reports of a refugee camp hidden in the Whispering Woods, where mortals and a few surviving Hellborn had banded together for mutual protection. The journey that should have taken 2 days stretched to 5 as they repeatedly detoured around angelic patrols, whose mere presence scorched the earth beneath their feet. "There," Dante murmured, pointing toward a thin column of smoke rising from beyond a ridge. "But something's wrong. That's not cookfire smoke." They crested the hill to find chaos below. The refugee camp was under attack, but not by angels. These were demons, true infernal creatures whose presence in the mortal realm should have been impossible. They moved through the camp like living nightmares, their claws and fangs tearing through defenders who were pitifully outmatched. "How are they here?" Serafina gasped, watching a creature of living shadow disembowel a young man who had been trying to protect a group of children. "I thought the barriers—" "The barriers are weakening," Dante said grimly, already moving down the slope. "The war is destabilizing everything. Heaven pushes from one side, hell from the other, and reality cracks under the pressure." They hit the demonic force like a thunderbolt of coordinated fury. Serafina's flames roared to life in forms she had never achieved before, whips of fire that moved with serpentine intelligence, seeking out enemy weak points with devastating precision. Beside her, Dante wielded his power like a master artist, each gesture creating weapons of crystallized flame that pierced demonic hide with surgical accuracy. But it was when their fires merged that the real devastation began. The harmonic effect they had discovered in training amplified exponentially in actual combat, creating a vortex of controlled hellfire that consumed their enemies, while leaving the mortal refugees untouched. Demons that had shrugged off conventional weapons simply ceased to exist when caught in the combined fury of the bonded pair. The battle was over in minutes, but its aftermath would haunt Serafina forever. Bodies lay scattered throughout the camp, mortals who had survived the angelic purges only to fall to demonic savagery, Hellborn who had died protecting people who would normally fear them, children who would never grow up to see the new world their sacrifice was helping to create. "Serafina!" A familiar voice called out, and she turned to see a figure emerging from a partially collapsed tent. It took her a moment to recognize Thomas, the blacksmith's son from Ashwick, his face gaunt and scarred but his eyes bright with desperate hope. "Thomas? I thought when the angels came." She had assumed everyone from her former home was dead. "Some of us escaped," he said, limping toward her. "Maybe 24 from the whole village. We've been trying to stay ahead of both sides, but—" He gestured helplessly at the destruction around them. "How many survivors?" Dante asked, already moving among the wounded with practiced efficiency. 63 before the attack, a new voice answered. Serafina turned to see a hellborn woman she didn't recognize, her dark skin marked with patterns of scars that spoke of ritual scarification rather than battle wounds. 31 now, including the children. The numbers hit Serafina like physical blows. In less than an hour, half the people in this desperate community had been butchered. And for what? The demons hadn't been seeking anything specific, hadn't made demands or tried to capture prisoners. They had simply killed for the joy of killing. "Who are you?" Dante asked the scarred woman. "Kira," she replied. "Former voice of justice for the northern sanctuaries, before the angels found us. I've been trying to organize resistance cells among the scattered survivors, but—" She shrugged, the gesture heavy with exhaustion and grief. "Northern sanctuaries?" Serafina felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. "How many?" "All of them," Kira said simply. 17 cities gone in a single night. The angels didn't just attack, they had inside information. Knew exactly where our defenses were, which buildings housed our leadership, where the children sheltered. Someone betrayed us. The implications were staggering. If the northern communities had been compromised, what about the other diplomatic missions the council had sent out? How many of their people were walking into traps even now? "We need to get word to Infernia," Dante said, voicing her thoughts. "No," Serafina said quietly, surprising them both. "Not yet. These people need help now, and if we leave to carry warnings, they'll be dead before we get back." "Serafina," Dante's voice carried a warning. "Our mission was reconnaissance and limited intervention. We can't save everyone." "Can't we?" She looked around at the survivors, mortals and hellborn huddled together in their shared desperation, children clinging to parents who might not live to see another dawn. "What's the point of building a better future if we let the present burn while we plan?" Before Dante could respond, Kira stepped forward. "There's something else you need to know. The demons that attacked us, they weren't random raiders. They were hunting for someone specific." "Who?" Serafina asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "A young hellborn woman with unusual power. One who's been marked by prophecy." Kira's scarred face was grim. "They were looking for you, Serafina. Whatever's happening, you're at the center of it." That night, as they made camp in the ruins of what had once been a thriving community, Serafina found herself unable to sleep. The weight of responsibility felt heavier than ever, pressing down on her like a physical force. Every choice she made seemed to ripple outward, affecting the lives of countless others in ways she couldn't predict or control. "Regrets?" Dante asked softly, settling beside her on the log she had chosen as a seat. "Doubts," she corrected. "What if the prophecies are wrong? What if I'm not the person they think I am? What if following me just gets more people killed? What if you are exactly who the prophecies say, and running from that destiny gets everyone killed anyway?" Dante countered. "The war is happening whether you participate or not. The only question is whether you try to shape its outcome, or let others decide the fate of every world." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars wheel overhead. In the distance they could see the glow of fires, some natural, others the result of ongoing conflicts between forces that should never have walked the same reality. "Tell me about Gabriel," Serafina said eventually. "Not how he died but how he lived. What made him special?" Dante was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of centuries-old love and loss. "He saw beauty in everything," Dante said. "Even in the darkest moments, even when we were fighting for our lives against enemies who wanted to unmake our very existence, Gabriel could find something worth protecting, something worth celebrating. He used to say that the universe was a song, and every living thing was a note in that melody. Our job wasn't to change the music, but to make sure our part was worth hearing. He sounds wonderful, Serafina said sincerely. He was. And you remind me of him in ways that used to terrify me. Dante turned to look at her, his amber eyes reflecting the distant fires. You have that same ability to see hope where others see only despair, to believe in possibilities that seem impossible. It's part of what makes you so dangerous to the established order. And to you. And to me, he admitted. Because loving someone like that means accepting that they might choose to sacrifice themselves for something greater. Gabriel did, in the end. He chose to buy time for evacuating civilians, rather than escape when he had the chance. Serafina reached for his hand, intertwining their fingers. I can't promise I won't make similar choices, if the situation demands it. But I can promise that I won't make them lightly, and I won't make them alone if I can help it. That's all anyone can promise, Dante said, squeezing her hand gently. And it's enough. Their quiet moment was interrupted by a commotion from the camp. Voices raised in alarm, the sound of running feet, and underlying it all, a low humming that seemed to resonate in Serafina's bones. She was on her feet before conscious thought kicked in, flame already dancing around her hands. What is it? She called to Kira, who was organizing the defenders into a protective circle around the non-combatants. Don't know, the scarred woman replied tersely. But it's coming fast and it's big. The humming grew louder, accompanied now by a sound like vast wings beating against the air. Then, impossibly, the stars began to dim as something enormous blotted them out. A shape descended from the night sky, not the clean geometric lines of an angelic construct, but something organic and terrible, all writhing tentacles and compound eyes the size of wagon wheels. Elder demon, Dante breathed, his face pale with recognition. From the deepest circles. How is it here? The creature settled onto the ground with surprising delicacy for something its size, tentacles spreading out to form a rough circle around their camp. When it spoke, its voice was like the sound of continents grinding together, each word a small earthquake that rattled their bones. Serafina of the burning heart, it rumbled. I have come to make you an offer. I'm listening, Serafina said, proud that her voice remained steady despite the primal terror the creature inspired. The war above grows tedious. Angels and demons destroy each other while the mortal realm burns. This serves no one's purpose. The creature's massive eyes fixed on her with uncomfortable intensity. My masters propose. Alliance. Alliance. Serafina repeated. With hell itself? Not with hell. With those WHO would remake the cosmic order. One tentacle gestured vaguely upward. Heaven seeks to purge all impurity. Hell seeks to corrupt all light. Both paths lead to stagnation, to death of possibility. And what does hell propose instead? Synthesis. Marriage of light and dark, order and chaos. Creation of new forms of existence that transcend old limitations. The creature leaned closer, its breath like sulfur and burned dreams. You carry the seed of such transcendence. With our power behind you, the prophecies could be fulfilled in ways that benefit all. Serafina felt the offer like a physical weight, pressing against her consciousness with seductive whispers of unlimited power and cosmic authority. She could sense Dante tensing beside her, could feel the fear radiating from the mortal survivors, but she also understood the terrible logic of what was being proposed. What would you want in return? She asked. Partnership. Recognition. A place in the new order you will create. The creature's voice carried notes of what might have been hope. We grow weary of eternal conflict, young flame. Perhaps it is time for something new. The offer hung in the air like a sword waiting to fall. Serafina could feel the weight of every gaze upon her, mortal and hellborn alike, looking to her for leadership in a moment that could reshape everything. The smart choice was probably to refuse, to reject any alliance with creatures that had terrorized humanity since the dawn of time. But looking around at the devastation surrounding them, at the desperate faces of people who had already lost everything, Serafina found herself considering possibilities that would have horrified her weeks ago. "I need time to think," she said finally. "Time is a luxury none of us possess," the creature replied, but there was understanding in its alien features. "The angelic hosts mass for final assault. The remaining sanctuaries fall one by one. Decision must come soon." With that ominous pronouncement, the elder demon launched itself back into the night sky, leaving behind only the lingering scent of brimstone and the echo of possibilities too dangerous to fully contemplate. "Serafina," Dante said quietly, "please tell me you're not seriously considering that offer." "I'm considering everything," she replied honestly. "Because traditional approaches clearly aren't working. Maybe it's time to think outside the cosmic box." As they settled back into an uneasy watch, Serafina found herself staring up at the stars and wondering if the prophecies had ever specified which side she was supposed to be on. Perhaps the real revolution wasn't choosing between heaven and hell, but finding a way to transcend the conflict entirely. The hellfire in her heart burned brighter than ever, no longer just a flame of destruction or protection, but something new entirely. Something that might, if she was brave enough to embrace it, remake the very foundations of existence itself. The question was whether the universe was ready for that kind of change, and whether she was strong enough to survive what she was becoming. Chapter 5: Eternal Flame. The final battle began not with trumpets or declarations of war, but with silence. The unnatural quiet that settled over the mortal realm in the hours before dawn spoke of vast forces gathering, of cosmic mechanisms turning toward inevitable collision. Serafina stood atop the ruins of what had once been a cathedral, its broken spires reaching toward a sky that flickered between natural blue and the hellish red of approaching apocalypse. 3 months had passed since the elder demon's offer, 3 months of impossible choices and Pyrrhic victories. The refugee camp had grown into something resembling a small city, as survivors from across the devastated lands sought sanctuary under Serafina's protection. But with each group that found them came new stories of horror: sanctuaries fallen, entire bloodlines extinguished, ancient places of power reduced to smoking craters where reality itself had been wounded. "The last of the evacuation ships have departed," Dante reported, climbing the rubble to join her on their makeshift watchtower. 2,000 souls bound for the Shadowlands, including most of the children. Serafina nodded without taking her eyes from the horizon, where impossible geometries were beginning to manifest, the advance guard of heaven's final assault. "And our people? 500 Hellborn volunteers plus whatever allies we can summon when the time comes." Dante's voice carried the weight of someone who had done the math and found it wanting. "Against 3 hosts of battle angels and whatever hell sends to meet them. The odds are irrelevant," Serafina finished. "We're not fighting to win a conventional victory. We're fighting to break the cycle, to prove that a third option exists." In the months since the demon's offer, Serafina had walked a razor's edge between hope and despair, salvation and damnation. She had accepted aid from hell's representatives, but on her own terms: power without servitude, alliance without corruption. The process had changed her in ways that she was only beginning to understand, her internal flame evolving into something that was neither purely infernal nor entirely her own. "Are you ready for this?" Dante asked, his hand finding hers among the broken stones. Their bond had deepened with each trial they had faced together, their combined power growing exponentially as they learned to function as a true unified entity. "I'm terrified," Serafina admitted. "But yes, I'm ready." The prophecies spoke of someone who would either unite the realms or destroy them all. Today, we find out which future I'm going to create. The first sign of the approaching battle was a sound like reality tearing, the noise of the dimensional barriers finally giving way under the pressure of opposing forces. The sky split open like an overripe fruit, revealing glimpses of realms that mortal eyes were never meant to see. Through one tear came the blinding radiance of the celestial sphere, beings of pure light, descending on wings that sang hosannas of purification and judgment. Through another came the writhing darkness of the infernal depths, creatures of shadow and flame rising to meet their ancient enemies in battle. And caught between them, standing on ground that belonged to neither heaven nor hell, were the defenders of the mortal realm, Hellborn who had chosen love over power, mortals who had chosen courage over safety, and at their center a young woman whose heart burned with possibilities that neither side had anticipated. Serafina. The voice that spoke her name belonged to something vast and terrible, an angelic being whose form was too complex for human perception to fully process. You have been offered redemption. Submit to divine will, and your followers will be granted swift death, rather than eternal torment. And I have a counteroffer, Serafina called back, her voice somehow carrying across the impossible distances that separated them. Withdraw your forces, end the purges, and accept that the mortal realm belongs to mortals. In return, I won't demonstrate why the prophecies called me dangerous to the established order. The angelic laughter that greeted her words was like crystal breaking, beautiful and sharp enough to cut. You speak of power you do not possess, child of corruption. You are one being against the might of heaven itself. She's not alone. The new voice belonged to Marcus, the voice of war, who materialized beside them with his flaming sword already drawn. And neither are you. Around them, space began to fold and twist, as reinforcements arrived from the remaining sanctuaries. Elena appeared with a contingent of healer warriors whose flames burned silver-white, with protective power. Arya brought artists whose reality-shaping abilities turned the very ground into weapons and shields. Thorn led judges whose binding words could constrain even divine beings within cosmic law. The survivors from the northern sanctuaries, Kira reported, her own forces materializing from shadow and flame. What's left of the eastern reach? Refugees from a dozen destroyed communities. They've all come to stand with you. Looking around at the assembled army, hundreds of Hellborn whose only crime had been existing outside the narrow definitions of cosmic purity, Serafina felt something fundamental shift inside her chest. The fire that burned there was no longer hers alone, but belonged to all of them, all the forgotten and cast-out children of multiple worlds, who had found family in their shared exile. Then let's show them what we've learned, she said, her flames beginning to rise in harmony with those of her chosen family. The battle that followed transcended anything the cosmos had witnessed since the first days of creation. Angels and demons clashed with forces that reshaped continents, their conflict spreading across multiple dimensions as reality itself became the battleground. But at the center of the storm, something unprecedented was happening. The Hellborn had stopped fighting as individuals and begun operating as a collective entity, their combined flames weaving patterns of power that neither heaven nor hell had prepared for. With Serafina and Dante as the focal point, their unified energy reached levels that approached cosmic significance, the kind of force that could unmake worlds or forge new ones. Impossible, the voice of the lead angel carried notes of genuine fear for the first time. The abominations cannot achieve such unity. They are creatures of chaos and discord. That's where you're wrong, Serafina replied, her voice now carrying harmonics from every throat that had joined their chorus. We're creatures of love. And love is the only force in existence that grows stronger when it's shared. The demonstration that followed shattered every assumption about the limits of Hellborn power. Working in perfect synchronization, the assembled army began to reshape reality around them, not through destruction but through creation. Where angelic weapons left scars in the fabric of existence, Hellborn power wove new possibilities. Where demonic influence spread corruption, their flames burned clean and bright, purifying without destroying. You would remake the cosmic order? The question came from both sides simultaneously, angels and demons speaking in unison for the first time in eons. I would heal it, Serafina corrected. The separation between realms was supposed to prevent conflict, but instead it created stagnation. Light without shadow becomes blinding. Darkness without hope becomes consuming. You need each other, need the tension and balance that comes from interaction. To demonstrate her point, she reached out with her enhanced senses and began to weave connections between the combatants, not forcing unity, but revealing the underlying harmonies that had always existed beneath their opposition. Angels and demons found themselves seeing through each other's perspectives, understanding for the first time the cosmic loneliness that drove their eternal conflict. What are you offering? The question came from the elder demon who had first approached her, its massive form hovering at the edge of the battlefield. Partnership instead of dominion. Growth instead of stagnation. The chance to evolve beyond the roles you were created to play. Serafina's flames had taken on qualities that belonged to neither heaven nor hell, something new that transcended both. Help me create a cosmos where beings from all realms can interact without destroying each other. Where mortals can grow and learn without being treated as pawns in someone else's game. The moment of decision stretched like a held breath across multiple dimensions. Serafina could feel the weight of cosmic history pressing down on them, eons of conflict and separation that had shaped the fundamental nature of existence itself. What she was proposing wasn't just a treaty or temporary alliance, it was a complete reimagining of how reality could function. The prophecies spoke of unity or destruction. Lucien's voice reached her through their shared connection. But they never specified what form that unity would take. The first to move was, surprisingly, a young angel whose form was barely more substantial than concentrated starlight. She descended from the heavenly host and landed before Serafina with wings that trembled uncertainty. "I am Lyra, seraph of the fourth choir," she said, her voice like silver bells. "I have watched the purges from above and wondered, is this truly what justice looks like? Is the elimination of all complexity and growth what my father intended?" "I don't know," Serafina replied honestly. "But I know that a cosmos without room for questions isn't worth preserving." One by one, others began to step forward. Angels who had grown weary of endless war. Demons who sought purpose beyond corruption and destruction. Mortals who refused to be protected through the elimination of everything that made existence complex and beautiful. Not all chose to join them, perhaps not even most. The forces of pure order and pure chaos would continue their eternal dance, but now there was a third option for those who sought something more nuanced. A space between absolutes where growth and change were possible. "It won't be easy," Dante warned, his flames intertwining with hers as they surveyed the new reality taking shape around them. "Building something from nothing never is." "But it will be worth it," Serafina replied, feeling the truth of those words resonate through every fiber of her being. Because for the first time in cosmic history, beings from all realms will have the chance to choose their own destiny. The hellfire in her heart had transformed one final time, becoming something that belonged to no single realm but to all of them, a flame that could burn eternal because it was fed by love instead of hatred, hope instead of despair, connection instead of isolation. As the three realms began the slow, difficult work of learning to coexist, Serafina looked up at a sky that now showed glimpses of multiple realities existing in harmony. The war was over, but the real work, the patient daily effort of building a better existence for all conscious beings, was just beginning. And for the first time since her transformation, she couldn't wait to see what tomorrow would bring. In the distance, children played in gardens where flowers from three different realms bloomed side by side, their laughter creating small auroras that danced between dimensions. It was a small thing, perhaps, but it was also everything, proof that love could indeed burn eternal, transforming even the fundamental structure of existence itself. The prophecies had been fulfilled, but not in the way anyone had expected. And that, Serafina thought as she watched angels and demons work together to rebuild what their war had destroyed, was perhaps the most beautiful outcome of all. The chronicles record that Serafina and Dante ruled together for 700 years, guiding the slow integration of the realms with wisdom born from love and understanding born from shared struggle. When they finally chose to step down, passing leadership to a new generation that had known no reality but cooperation, they did so hand in hand, their flames burning as bright as the day they first learned to trust each other completely. The Hellfire Heart had become the foundation of a new cosmic order, one built not on the separation of light and dark, but on their eternal dance together. And in that dance, all beings found the freedom to become more than they had ever dreamed possible.
Infernal Desire, A Romance of Fire and Fate. By Victoria Ashwoods. Chapter 1, The Summons. The ancient mirror in Serafina Blackthorn's attic had been calling to her for 3 nights running, its silvered surface rippling with shadows that defied the laws of physics.
Standing before it now in the dim candlelight of her grandmother's estate, she traced the intricate symbols carved into its obsidian frame with trembling fingers. The glass seemed to pulse with an otherworldly warmth, drawing her closer despite every rational instinct screaming at her to flee. Serafina had inherited more than just the sprawling Victorian mansion when her grandmother passed 6 months ago. Along with the creaking floors and rooms filled with curiosities, came a legacy she was only beginning to understand. Her grandmother's journal, discovered hidden beneath loose floorboards, spoke of ancient bloodlines, supernatural guardians, and a family duty that had been passed down through generations of Blackthorn women. The mirror was the key to it all, according to the elegant script that filled page after page of her grandmother's careful observations. It was a doorway, a summoning circle, and a binding contract all wrapped into one artifact of immense power. For centuries, the women of her line had used it to call forth their supernatural protectors in times of great need. Tonight, with strange incidents plaguing the town and dark figures watching her house from the shadows, Serafina felt that time had come. Her fingers found the small silver knife her grandmother had left specifically for this purpose, its blade etched with matching symbols that seemed to glow faintly in the mirror's presence. The ritual was simple enough, according to the instructions. A few drops of blood, the right incantation, and sincere need would summon the guardian bound to her family's service. What her grandmother's journal hadn't mentioned was exactly what form that guardian would take. The blade bit into her palm with surgical precision, and crimson drops fell onto the mirror's surface. Instead of running down the glass, the blood spread outward in spiraling patterns, following the carved symbols as if following invisible channels. The mirror began to pulse with deeper shadows, and the temperature in the room plummeted despite the dancing flames of her candles. By blood and binding, by fire and fate, Serafina spoke the words written in her grandmother's journal, her voice growing stronger with each syllable. I call upon the guardians sworn to my line. Come forth and answer your summoner's need. The mirror exploded with brilliant crimson light, and the very air in the attic seemed to tear apart. Serafina stumbled backward as sulphurous smoke poured from the glass, followed by waves of heat that made her skin prickle with supernatural energy. Through the swirling chaos, a figure began to emerge, tall and powerfully built, with features that were both devastatingly beautiful and utterly terrifying. Damien Ashworth stepped through the mirror as if it were nothing more than an open doorway, his polished black boots clicking against the wooden floor with predatory grace. His dark hair was perfectly styled despite his journey between realms, and his suit was immaculate, though it seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. When his eyes met hers, Serafina felt her breath catch in her throat. They were the deep red of garnets, with flickers of actual flame dancing in their depths. Well, he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to resonate in her very bones, it's about time. Serafina found herself unable to look away from his face, though every survival instinct she possessed warned her that she was in the presence of something far more dangerous than she had anticipated. His features were sharp and aristocratic, with high cheekbones and a jawline that could have been carved from marble. When he smiled, revealing teeth that were just a fraction too perfect, she caught a glimpse of fangs. You're not what I expected, she managed to whisper, clutching her bleeding hand against her chest. And what exactly were you expecting, Miss Blackthorn? Damien stepped closer, and she could smell smoke and spice on his skin, along with something darker that made her pulse quicken. A cute little fairy godmother? A helpful house spirit? Your grandmother never told you what I am, did she? The truth was written in the supernatural heat that radiated from his body, and the way shadows seemed to bend toward him like living things seeking his attention. Serafina had summoned a demon, bound to her family through some ancient contract she was only beginning to understand. The realization should have terrified her, but instead, she felt a thrill of excitement that she couldn't quite explain. You're a demon, she said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. Among other things. Damien's smile widened, showing more of those dangerous teeth. I prefer the term infernal entity if we're being precise about classifications. But yes, I am what your kind would consider a creature of hell. And you, lovely Serafina, are my summoner. He knew her name, though she hadn't given it. Of course he would know her name. The binding between their families went back generations, according to her grandmother's journal. This demon had served Blackthorn women for centuries, protecting them from supernatural threats in exchange for something her grandmother had been frustratingly vague about in her writings. "What do you want from me?" Serafina asked, though part of her already suspected the answer. Damien's laugh was rich and dark, like expensive wine poured over velvet. "Want from you? My dear girl, you have it backwards. You summoned me. The question is what you want from me. Though I suspect I already know the answer to that as well." He gestured toward the window, and Serafina followed his gaze to see several dark figures standing at the edge of her property. They were too far away to make out clearly, but something about their stillness and the way they watched her house made her skin crawl. She had been seeing them for weeks now, always at the periphery of her vision, always watching. "Shadow wraiths," Damien explained, his voice taking on a harder edge. "Nasty creatures that feed on fear and despair. They've been drawn to the power awakening in you, and they won't stop until they've drained every drop of it from your beautiful body." "Power awakening in me?" Serafina turned back to face him, confusion mixing with growing alarm. "What are you talking about?" "Oh, this is rich." Damien's eyes blazed brighter, and his grin turned predatory. "She really didn't tell you anything, did she? Your dear grandmother left you completely unprepared for what's coming." He moved closer, close enough that she could feel the supernatural heat radiating from his skin. When he reached out to touch her cheek, his fingers were warm enough to burn, though they left no mark. The contact sent electricity racing through her entire body, awakening sensations she had never experienced before. "You're not just any Blackthorn woman, Serafina. You're the last of your line, which makes you incredibly valuable to creatures like myself. But more importantly, you're coming into your full power at the exact moment when the barriers between realms are weakening. Every supernatural creature within 100 miles can sense it." The implications hit her like a physical blow. "They're all going to come for me." "Eventually, yes." Damien's thumb traced across her lower lip, and she shivered at the contact. "Unless, of course, you have a very powerful protector keeping them at bay. Someone who has a vested interest in your continued health and well-being." "And what would you want in return for that protection?" Serafina's voice came out breathier than she intended, her body responding to his proximity in ways that should have alarmed her. "The same thing my kind has always wanted from yours." His hand slid down to rest against her throat, fingers spanning her pulse point. "A contract written in pleasure and sealed with desire. I protect you from the creatures hunting you, and in return you give yourself to me completely." The offer hung in the air between them like a physical thing, charged with supernatural energy and dark promise. Serafina knew she should be horrified by the suggestion, should send him back to whatever hell he had emerged from and find some other way to deal with her problems. But the heat of his touch and the fire in his eyes called to something deep within her that she had never acknowledged before. "I need time to think," she whispered. "Of course you do." Damien stepped back, though the loss of his warmth left her feeling suddenly cold. "But don't take too long, beautiful. Those shadow wraiths won't wait for you to make up your mind, and they're not the only things hunting you now that your power has awakened." He moved toward the mirror, which still rippled with otherworldly energy. Before stepping through, he turned back to fix her with that burning gaze one last time. "I'll be watching over you tonight, keeping the worst of them at bay. But my protection only extends so far, without a proper contract between us. Tomorrow night you'll need to make your choice." "And if I refuse?" Damien's smile was sharp enough to cut. "Then you'll discover just how creative supernatural predators can be when they're hunting someone with power like yours. Sleep well, Serafina Blackthorn." He stepped backward through the mirror, which flashed once with brilliant light before returning to its normal silvered surface. The sulphurous smoke dissipated, taking with it the oppressive heat that had filled the room. Serafina was left alone with her racing heart and the lingering scent of smoke and spice that clung to her skin. She moved to the window and looked out at her property. The shadow wraiths were gone, but she could sense them lurking just beyond the tree line, waiting for their chance. Tomorrow night, she would have to choose between surrendering herself to a demon's dark desires or facing whatever supernatural threats were gathering in the darkness alone. The smart choice was obvious. The safe choice was clear. But as Serafina touched her lips where Damien's thumb had traced their outline, she realized that safety had never felt less appealing. The demon had awakened something in her with that simple touch, something that craved the fire she had seen burning in his eyes. Tomorrow night couldn't come soon enough. Chapter 2: The Contract. Serafina spent the following day researching everything she could find about demon contracts, supernatural protection, and her own family's hidden history. Her grandmother's personal library, sealed behind a hidden panel in the study, contained volumes that would have made scholars of the occult weep with envy. Ancient grimoires bound in leather that felt suspiciously warm to the touch, handwritten accounts of supernatural encounters dating back centuries, and detailed genealogies that traced the Blackthorn line back to medieval times. What she discovered both fascinated and terrified her. The Blackthorn women had indeed been summoners and witches, but they had also been something more. They were conduits, vessels through which supernatural power flowed between realms. Each generation had been more powerful than the last, and according to her grandmother's careful documentation, Serafina represented the culmination of centuries of careful breeding and magical cultivation. The contracts with demons were nothing new. Her great-great-grandmother had bound herself to a creature called Malphas in exchange for protection during the Civil War. Her great-grandmother had summoned an entity named Baal to help her survive the influenza pandemic of 1918. The pattern was clear. In times of great supernatural threat, Blackthorn women called upon infernal allies to survive. But Damien's contract was different from the others. The previous bindings had been temporary, lasting only as long as the immediate threat persisted. What he offered was permanent protection in exchange for a bond that would last until one of them died. The implications made her blood run hot and cold alternately. As night fell, Serafina found herself standing before the mirror once again, dressed in the deep red silk gown she had discovered in her grandmother's wardrobe. The dress fit her perfectly, as if it had been made specifically for this moment. Its neckline was lower than anything she would normally wear, and the fabric clung to her curves in ways that made her feel both powerful and vulnerable. She had made her decision during the long hours of research and contemplation. The supernatural world had already claimed her, whether she wanted it or not. The shadow wraiths had returned with the sunset, and this time they weren't alone. Dark shapes moved through her gardens, and inhuman howls echoed from the forest that bordered her property. Without protection, she would be dead before dawn. The summoning was easier the second time. Her blood called to the mirror with practiced ease, and the barriers between realms parted like curtains. Damien stepped through with the same predatory grace as before, but tonight there was something different in his bearing. He moved like a predator who had finally cornered his prey. "You look exquisite," he said, his burning gaze traveling slowly down her body before returning to her face. "Red suits you, though I suspect you would look even better in nothing at all." Heat flooded Serafina's cheeks, but she didn't look away. "I've made my decision." "Have you now?" Damien circled her slowly, and she could feel his eyes on every inch of exposed skin. "And what decision would that be?" "I accept your contract." The words came out stronger than she felt. "I'll bind myself to you in exchange for your protection." Such a simple statement for such a momentous choice. Damien stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she could see her reflection in the depths of his burning eyes. "Do you understand what you're agreeing to, Serafina? This isn't some fairy tale romance where the handsome prince saves the innocent maiden. I am a creature of hell, and the contract you're accepting will bind your soul to mine for eternity." "I understand." She lifted her chin defiantly, though her heart was racing so fast she was sure he could hear it. "But I also understand that without your protection, I'll be dead before morning." "True enough." His smile was sharp and predatory. "Very well then. Let us discuss terms." Damien snapped his fingers, and the air around them shimmered. When the distortion cleared, they were no longer in her grandmother's attic, but in what appeared to be an elegant study lined with shelves of ancient books. A fire crackled in an ornate fireplace, casting dancing shadows across walls decorated with artwork that seemed to move when she wasn't looking directly at it. "Where are we?" Serafina asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "My domain within the infernal realms." Damien moved to an antique desk and withdrew a scroll of parchment that glowed faintly in the firelight. Contracts of this magnitude require proper setting and ceremony. "Please sit." He gestured to a chair that hadn't been there moments before, upholstered in deep burgundy velvet that matched her dress. As she settled into it, Serafina noticed that the fabric was warm against her skin, as if it had been sitting in sunlight. "The terms are simple," Damien began, unrolling the parchment across the desk's surface. "I provide you with complete protection from all supernatural threats, enhanced magical abilities, and extended lifespan. In return, you surrender your body and soul to my care." "Surrender my body and soul?" Serafina's voice came out higher than she intended. "What exactly does that mean?" "It means you belong to me in every way that matters." Damien's eyes blazed brighter as he spoke, and she could see the flames dancing more actively in their depths. "Your pleasure becomes mine to command. Your desires become mine to fulfill. Your very existence becomes intertwined with my own." The words should have terrified her, but instead, they sent a thrill of excitement racing through her body. The way he looked at her, with such focused intensity and barely restrained hunger, made her feel more alive than she ever had before. "And if I want to end the contract?" she asked, though part of her already knew the answer. "You can't." Damien's smile was both tender and terrible. "That's the nature of an eternal binding. Once your soul is bound to mine, we are connected until death parts us. And since I am immortal and the contract will extend your lifespan considerably, that could be a very long time indeed." Serafina studied the parchment, though the writing seemed to shift and change whenever she tried to focus on specific clauses. The supernatural nature of the document made it impossible to read through conventional means, but she could sense the power contained within its carefully crafted words. "There's something you're not telling me," she said, looking up to meet his burning gaze. "Something about why you want this contract so badly." Damien was quiet for a long moment, and for the first time since she had summoned him, he seemed almost vulnerable. When he spoke, his voice was softer than she had heard it before. "Demons like myself are not naturally inclined toward emotional attachments. We are creatures of desire and destruction, power and pleasure. But occasionally, very rarely, we encounter someone who calls to something deeper within us." He reached across the desk to trace his fingers along her hand. "Your bloodline has always been special, Serafina, but you are extraordinary even among the Blackthorn women. What makes me different? Your power is unlike anything I've encountered in centuries of existence. When you summoned me last night, I felt it resonate in my very core. You don't just have magical abilities, you are magic itself given human form." His fingers intertwined with hers, and she gasped at the electricity that raced between them. "A creature like myself could feed on that power for eternity and never diminish it." The revelation sent chills down her spine, but not entirely from fear. There was something intoxicating about being desired so intensely by such a powerful being. The way Damien looked at her made her feel like the most precious treasure in any realm. "And what do I get besides protection?" she asked, proud of how steady her voice sounded. "Pleasure beyond your wildest imaginings." His thumb traced across her knuckles, and each point of contact sent heat racing up her arm. "Magical abilities that will make you one of the most powerful supernatural beings in existence. And the devotion of someone who will worship you for the rest of eternity." The offer was tempting beyond reason. Serafina had spent her entire life feeling ordinary, unremarkable, except for her academic achievements. The idea of possessing real power, of being cherished and protected by someone as magnificent as Damien, called to desires she had never allowed herself to acknowledge. "If I sign this contract," she said slowly, "there's no going back." "None whatsoever." Damien lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her palm that burned like a brand. "But I promise you this, Serafina Blackthorn. If you bind yourself to me, I will spend every moment of our eternal existence ensuring you never regret that choice." She looked down at the parchment one more time, knowing that once she signed it, her life as a normal human woman would be over forever. Everything she had known, everything she had planned for her future, would be replaced by something supernatural and dangerous and utterly unknown. But outside Damien's domain, creatures of nightmare were hunting her. Without his protection, she would be lucky to survive the night, let alone build any kind of future. And beneath her very rational fears lay a deeper truth. She wanted this. She wanted the power he offered, the passion she saw burning in his eyes, and yes, she wanted him. "Where do I sign?" she asked. Damien's smile was brilliant and terrible, as he produced an ornate quill that gleamed like it was made of liquid fire. "Your signature in blood over your heart." Serafina took the quill, surprised by how warm it felt in her grip. The tip was sharp enough to pierce skin with the gentlest pressure, and when she pressed it to the spot over her heart, crimson drops immediately welled up to stain the silk of her dress. She signed her name with steady strokes, each letter glowing briefly as it appeared on the parchment. The moment she finished the final stroke, the contract ignited with supernatural fire, burning away to nothing in seconds. But the binding was complete. She could feel it settling into her very bones like a warm embrace that would never fade. "It is done," Damien said, his voice rough with satisfaction and something deeper. "You are mine, Serafina, and I am yours." The power hit her then, rushing through her body like liquid lightning. Her magical abilities, awakened by the binding, exploded outward with enough force to shatter every piece of glass in the room. She would have fallen if Damien hadn't caught her, pulling her against his chest as supernatural energy crackled around them both. "Easy," he murmured against her hair, his arms tightening around her. "Let it settle. Let it find its balance." Serafina clung to him as waves of power crashed through her system, each one stronger than the last. She could feel everything now. Every supernatural creature for miles around, every ward and protection spell carved into her grandmother's house, every ley line that crossed beneath the earth. The world had become a vast web of magical energy, and she was connected to all of it. When the initial surge finally subsided, she found herself looking up into Damien's face with eyes that she somehow knew now glowed with their own inner light. He was watching her with an expression of wonder and possessive satisfaction that made her pulse quicken. "How do you feel?" he asked, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. "Different," she whispered. "Powerful. Like I could set the world on fire if I wanted to." "You probably could." His thumb traced the line of her cheekbone, and everywhere he touched left trails of heat. "But first, let me show you the other benefits of our contract." Before she could ask what he meant, Damien's lips were on hers, and Serafina discovered that kissing a demon was nothing like kissing a mortal man. His mouth was hot enough to burn, but instead of pain, the heat sent pleasure racing through every nerve in her body. When his tongue traced the seam of her lips, she opened for him eagerly, gasping at the taste of smoke and spice and something indefinably dark. The kiss deepened, and Serafina felt herself melting against him as supernatural desire crashed over her in waves. This was what the contract had bound her to: passion that burned hotter than hellfire and pleasure that would consume her completely. As Damien's hands tangled in her hair and his mouth moved to trace the line of her throat, she realized she had never wanted anything more in her life. "Welcome to eternity, my beautiful summoner," he whispered against her skin. "Let me show you what paradise really looks like." Chapter 3: Awakening Power. The morning after the binding found Serafina in her own bed, though she had no memory of how she had gotten there. Sunlight streamed through her bedroom windows, but it seemed different somehow, more vibrant and alive than before. When she sat up, the sheets fell away to reveal that she was wearing a nightgown of the finest silk, deep burgundy with lace that seemed to shimmer with its own inner light. Her body felt different too. Stronger, more alive, humming with energy that seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat. When she looked in the mirror, her reflection took her breath away. Her skin seemed to glow with health and vitality, her hair was lustrous and full, and her eyes held flecks of gold that hadn't been there before. The contract had changed her in ways that went far beyond the magical. But it was the memories that truly overwhelmed her. Images of the night before flooded back in vivid detail. Damien's burning touch, the way he had worshipped her body with his hands and mouth, the supernatural pleasure that had consumed them both as their souls bound together. Even thinking about it now made heat pool low in her belly, and her skin flush with remembered desire. A soft knock at her bedroom door interrupted her reverie. "Come in," she called, expecting to see Mrs. Whitmore, the elderly housekeeper who looked after the estate. Instead, Damien stepped through the door carrying a silver tray laden with breakfast. He looked magnificent in the morning light, his dark hair perfectly styled, and his shirt open at the collar to reveal a tantalizing glimpse of his chest. When he smiled, those perfect teeth gleamed white against his lips. "Good morning, beautiful," he said, setting the tray on her bedside table. "I thought you might be hungry after last night's activities." Serafina's cheeks burned at the implication, but she couldn't deny the way her body responded to his presence. The bond between them hummed with awareness, and she could feel his desire for her like a tangible thing in the air. "You stayed," she said, surprised by how pleased that made her feel. "I told you, you belong to me now." Damien sat on the edge of the bed, close enough that she could smell his distinctive scent of smoke and spice. "That means I belong to you as well. Where else would I be? I thought demons had obligations in hell. Duties to attend to. My only duty now is to you." His hand came up to trace the line of her jaw, and she shivered at the contact. "The contract supersedes all other bonds and obligations. You are my priority in all things." The possessiveness in his voice should have alarmed her, but instead it sent a thrill of excitement racing through her body. Being claimed so completely by someone as powerful as Damien was intoxicating in ways she was still learning to understand. "What happens now?" she asked, leaning into his touch despite herself. "Now we begin your training." Damien's eyes gleamed with anticipation. "The power you gain through our binding needs to be controlled and focused, or it could be dangerous to both of us. And there are other supernatural creatures who will want to test your new abilities." As if summoned by his words, a tremendous crash echoed from somewhere downstairs, followed by inhuman roars that made the windows rattle in their frames. Serafina started to rise from the bed, but Damien's hand on her shoulder kept her in place. "Stay here," he commanded, his voice taking on an edge of authority that brooked no argument. "I'll handle this." "No." Serafina pushed his hand away and stood, power crackling around her like visible electricity. "I'm not going to hide while something attacks my home. This is exactly the kind of situation you bound yourself to me to handle." Damien studied her for a moment, and she could see approval gleaming in his burning eyes. "Very well. But you follow my lead and do exactly as I say. The creatures downstairs are not the garden variety shadow wraiths from last night. These are something much more dangerous." They dressed quickly, Serafina in dark jeans and a fitted black sweater that seemed to enhance her new supernatural presence. Damien produced weapons from thin air, a sword that gleamed with infernal fire for himself, and a pair of ornate silver daggers that felt perfectly balanced in her hands. "Channel your power into the blades," he instructed as they made their way downstairs. "Your magic will enhance their effectiveness against supernatural targets." Serafina concentrated, and the daggers immediately began to glow with white hot light. The power flowing through her was intoxicating, making her feel capable of anything. When they reached the main floor, she could see that the front door had been torn completely off its hinges. 3 creatures stalked through her grandmother's carefully appointed living room, and they were unlike anything from her worst nightmares. They stood nearly 8 feet tall on legs that bent wrong, their skin was mottled gray and black, and their faces were a horrific mixture of human and reptilian features. Long claws tipped their fingers, and their mouths were filled with rows of razor-sharp teeth. "Gorgon spawn," Damien muttered, raising his flaming sword. "Someone sent these specifically to test your new abilities." "Who would do that?" Serafina asked, though part of her was too focused on the way power hummed through her body to be properly afraid. "Someone who wants to see if you're worthy of the power you've gained. Or someone who wants to eliminate you before you become too strong to challenge." The largest of the creatures turned toward them, its yellow eyes fixing on Serafina with unmistakable hunger. When it spoke, its voice was like gravel grinding against stone. "The new Witch Queen," it hissed, stalking closer with predatory grace. "We have come to taste your power." "You'll taste steel instead," Serafina replied, surprised by the confidence in her own voice. She moved before Damien could stop her, power flowing through her body as she launched herself at the nearest creature. Her daggers found their mark with supernatural precision, sliding between the monster's ribs to pierce whatever passed for its heart. The silver blades, enhanced by her magical energy, burned through its defenses like they were made of paper. The creature's death scream shook the house to its foundations, but Serafina was already moving toward the second monster. This one was ready for her attack, massive claws sweeping toward her head with enough force to decapitate a normal human. But she was no longer normal, and the enhanced reflexes granted by her bond with Damien allowed her to duck under the attack and drive both daggers up into the creature's throat. The third monster tried to flee, but Damien appeared in its path like a shadow made flesh. His burning sword took its head off in a single elegant stroke, and sulphurous blood splattered across her grandmother's antique wallpaper. "Well," Damien said, turning to look at her with obvious approval, "that was impressive." Serafina looked down at the daggers in her hands, still glowing with residual power. She had just killed 3 supernatural monsters without breaking a sweat, and instead of being horrified, she felt exhilarated. The power flowing through her was addictive, making her crave more challenges to test herself against. "Is it always going to be like this?" she asked, gesturing at the carnage surrounding them. "For a while, yes." Damien moved to her side, his hand coming to rest on the small of her back. "Word of your transformation will spread quickly through the supernatural community. Every ambitious creature within 100 miles will want to test themselves against you. And if I keep winning, then eventually they'll stop coming, and you'll be recognized as a power to be feared and respected." His smile was sharp and proud. "Though I suspect it won't take long for that to happen. You fight like you were born to it." The warmth in his voice made her chest tighten with emotions she wasn't ready to examine too closely. Having someone believe in her abilities so completely was intoxicating in its own way, almost as addictive as the power itself. "We should clean this up before Mrs. Whitmore arrives," she said, trying to focus on practical matters. "Allow me." Damien raised his hand, and the 3 corpses burst into flames that consumed them completely without damaging anything else in the room. When the fire died down, there was no trace that the creatures had ever existed. Even the door reformed itself, hanging perfectly on its hinges as if it had never been damaged. "Convenient," Serafina observed. "One of the many benefits of being bound to someone with my particular skill set." Damien moved closer, and she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Though I have to say, watching you fight was incredibly arousing. There's something about a powerful woman covered in the blood of her enemies that appeals to my more primal instincts." Heat flooded Serafina's cheeks, but she didn't pull away when his arms came around her waist. The bond between them pulsed with renewed intensity, and she could feel his desire for her like a physical touch against her skin. "Is that what I am now?" she asked, looking up into his burning eyes. "A powerful woman?" "You're so much more than that." His hand came up to cup her face, thumb tracing across her lower lip. "You're magnificent, Serafina. A queen in every sense of the word." Before she could respond, his mouth was on hers, and all rational thought fled in the face of supernatural desire. The kiss was hungry and desperate, full of the adrenaline from their recent battle and the deeper passion that burned between them always. When he lifted her onto the antique dining table, scattering her grandmother's carefully arranged place settings, she didn't protest. "Here," she gasped against his mouth, though her body was already arching into his touch. "Everywhere," he promised, his voice rough with need. "I'm going to worship you in every room of this house until you understand exactly how precious you are to me." His hands were already working at the fastenings of her clothes, and Serafina realized she didn't care about propriety or the risk of Mrs. Whitmore's arrival. The power flowing through her body demanded an outlet, and losing herself in Damien's burning touch seemed like the perfect solution. Outside, thunder rumbled across the clear morning sky, and she realized it was responding to the magical energy crackling around them. Her newfound abilities were tied to her emotions, growing stronger when she was aroused or excited. The implications of that connection sent another wave of heat racing through her body. "Mine," Damien whispered against her throat, his teeth grazing the sensitive skin there. "My beautiful, powerful queen." "Yours," she agreed, surprising herself with how easily the admission came. "Always yours." The bond between them flared brilliant white, and outside the storm began in earnest. Serafina decided she had never loved the sound of thunder more. Chapter 4: Rivals and Revelations. 3 weeks after the binding, Serafina's life had transformed beyond recognition. Word of her newfound power had indeed spread through the supernatural community, but instead of the constant attacks she had expected, she found herself receiving visitors of an entirely different sort. Powerful beings from across the magical spectrum came to her estate seeking alliances, offering tribute, or simply wanting to meet the new witch queen who had bound herself to one of hell's most formidable demons. Damien proved to be an invaluable guide through the complex politics of supernatural society. He had connections everywhere, from the highest courts of hell to the most exclusive covens of earthbound witches. His presence at her side ensured that she was treated with the respect due her position, though she was still learning exactly what that position entailed. This particular morning found them in the newly renovated drawing room, which Damien had transformed into something resembling a throne room. Ornate chairs carved from black wood faced a raised dais where 2 throne-like seats waited for important meetings. The decor managed to be both elegant and intimidating, projecting power without crossing the line into ostentatious display. "The next visitor should be interesting," Damien said, consulting an appointment book that appeared to be bound in scales. "Lilith Ravencroft, head of the Northern Coven, and one of the most powerful witches in North America." "Should I be worried?" Serafina asked, adjusting the deep purple silk dress she had chosen for the day's meetings. The gown was another gift from Damien, who seemed to take great pleasure in selecting clothes that enhanced her supernatural beauty. Cautious would be a better word. Damien's expression was thoughtful as he considered his words. "Lilith is ambitious and intelligent, but she's also pragmatic. She won't challenge you directly unless she's certain she can win. However, she may try to test your resolve in more subtle ways." Before Serafina could ask what he meant by that, the drawing room doors opened to admit a woman who commanded attention the moment she entered. Lilith Ravencroft was stunningly beautiful in an otherworldly way, with pale skin that seemed to glow with inner light, silver hair that moved like liquid mercury, and violet eyes that held depths of power and knowledge. She wore a gown of midnight blue that seemed to absorb light, and when she moved, shadows followed in her wake. "Serafina Blackthorn," Lilith said, her voice musical and carefully modulated. "The woman who has captured the attention of the entire supernatural world." "Ms. Ravencroft." Serafina inclined her head politely, though she remained seated on her throne. Damien had coached her extensively on the subtle hierarchies and power displays that govern supernatural politics. "Welcome to my home." "Your home and so much more, I understand." Lilith's gaze swept the room appraising Ly before settling on Damien. "Lord Ashworth, it's been some time since you've graced our earthly realm with your presence." "I've found compelling reasons to stay," Damien replied smoothly, though Serafina could feel tension radiating from him through their bond. Indeed. Lilith's smile was sharp as a blade. How fortunate for Miss Blackthorn that you were available when she needed protection. Though I have to wonder if she truly understands the price of that protection. The challenge in her words was unmistakable, and Serafina felt power begin to crackle around her in response. I understand it perfectly, thank you. Perhaps you'd like to explain the purpose of your visit? Direct. I like that. Lilith moved closer to the dais, her violet eyes fixed on Serafina's face. I've come to make you an offer, Witch Queen. The Northern Coven would like to extend an invitation for you to join our ranks. I'm honored by the offer, Serafina replied carefully, but I'm not sure what I could contribute to your coven that would justify such an invitation. Lilith's laugh was like silver bells, beautiful and cold. False modesty doesn't suit you, dear. We both know that your power levels are unprecedented among earthbound witches. With the right training and guidance, you could become one of the most influential magical practitioners in the world. And what would you want in return for this training and guidance? Damien interjected, his voice carrying a warning edge. Nothing unreasonable. Lilith's smile widened, showing teeth that were just a fraction too sharp. Simply the loyalty and support that any coven member owes to her sisters. And of course, she would need to relocate to our headquarters in Salem. The true nature of the offer became clear immediately. Joining the Northern Coven would mean leaving Damien behind, since demons were not welcome in most witch communities. It would also mean subordinating herself to Lilith's authority, and potentially being used as a weapon in whatever political games the Coven was playing. I appreciate the offer, Serafina said, her voice cooling several degrees, but I'm quite content with my current arrangements. Are you? Lilith's eyes gleamed with malicious amusement. How interesting. I was under the impression that your binding to Lord Ashworth was a matter of necessity rather than choice. Surely, now that you've come into your full power, you must chafe at the restrictions of such a contract. Serafina felt Damien tense beside her, though his expression remained carefully neutral. Through their bond, she could sense his concern that Lilith's words might plant seeds of doubt about their relationship. The only restriction I feel, Serafina said, letting power creep into her voice, is the one preventing me from demonstrating to visitors exactly how unwelcome their interference is in my personal affairs. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees as magical energy crackled between the two women. Lilith's eyes widened slightly, as if she hadn't expected such a strong response, while Damien's approval flowed through their bond like warm honey. My apologies, Lilith said, though her tone suggested she wasn't sorry at all. I didn't mean to imply that your choices were anything other than freely made. Though I do hope you'll consider that binding yourself eternally to a demon might limit your options in ways you haven't yet anticipated. Such as? Serafina's voice was dangerously quiet. Well, children for one thing. Lilith's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Demons are notoriously difficult to reproduce with, and even when conception occurs, the offspring rarely survive to term. It would be a shame for such a powerful bloodline to end with you. The words hit Serafina like a physical blow. In all her research about demon contracts and supernatural bindings, she had never come across anything about fertility issues. The possibility that her choice might have cost her the chance to have a family was devastating in ways she hadn't expected. That's enough, Damien said, rising from his throne with deadly grace. Shadows gathered around him, and his eyes blazed with infernal fire. You've delivered your offer and received your answer. I suggest you leave before I forget my manners. Of course. Lilith moved toward the door, but paused to look back at Serafina. If you ever change your mind, the Northern Coven's offer will remain open. We take care of our own, and we would hate to see such potential wasted. The moment the doors closed behind her, Serafina rounded on Damien with fury blazing in her eyes. Is it true? About children? Damien's expression was carefully controlled, but she could feel guilt and regret flowing through their bond. It's complicated. Complicated how? Serafina's power lashed out, shattering every piece of glass in the room simultaneously. Answer me, Damien. Did you know that binding myself to you might cost me the chance to have children? I knew it was a possibility, he admitted, his voice heavy with remorse. But there have been successful pregnancies between demons and humans before. It's not impossible, just difficult. Difficult enough that you didn't think it was worth mentioning when I was making the most important decision of my life? Serafina's voice was rising, and outside, thunder began to rumble across the clear afternoon sky. Would it have changed your decision? Damien asked quietly. If I had told you about the fertility risks, would you have chosen differently? The question hung in the air between them like a physical thing. Serafina wanted to say yes, wanted to rage at him for keeping such crucial information from her. But the truth was more complicated than that. Even knowing what she knew now, facing death at the hands of supernatural predators, she wasn't sure she would have chosen differently. That's not the point, she said finally. The point is that you should have told me. I should have been able to make an informed choice. You're right. Damien moved toward her, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. I should have told you. I was afraid that if you knew about the risks, you would find another way to protect yourself. I was selfish, and I'm sorry. The sincerity in his voice and the genuine remorse flowing through their bond took some of the wind out of her anger. She could feel how much he regretted the omission, how much he hated seeing her in pain because of his choices. Are there other things you haven't told me? She asked, crossing her arms over her chest. Other surprises waiting to surface later? Nothing that significant, Damien said, though his expression remained troubled. There are aspects of our bond that will become clearer as time passes, but nothing that would have fundamentally changed your decision to accept the contract. Serafina studied his face, using both her enhanced senses and their supernatural connection to evaluate his truthfulness. She could detect no deception in his words, though she sensed there were still things he wasn't telling her. The question was whether those omissions were as significant as the fertility issue. I need some time to think, she said finally. About all of this. Of course. Damien's disappointment was evident, but he didn't try to argue or convince her otherwise. I'll give you whatever space you need. He moved toward the door but paused when she called his name. Damien? When you said there have been successful pregnancies between demons and humans, how successful? What are we talking about in terms of actual numbers? His silence stretched long enough that she had her answer before he spoke. Perhaps 1 in 100 attempts result in a living child. The odds were worse than she had imagined, though not completely impossible. As Damien left her alone with her thoughts, Serafina found herself faced with a choice she had never expected to have to make. She could try to break their contract and reclaim her humanity, risking everything in the process. Or she could accept that her path lay in the supernatural world, with all the limitations and possibilities that entailed. Outside her window, storm clouds gathered in response to her emotional turmoil, and Serafina realized that whatever choice she made, there would be no going back. The question was whether the love she felt growing between herself and Damien was worth the sacrifice of the future she had always imagined. The answer, she was beginning to realize, might be more complicated than either of them had anticipated. Chapter 5: Eternal Flames. The confrontation with Lilith had shaken something fundamental in Serafina's understanding of her new life, but it was the conversation with Damien that followed 3 days later that changed everything. She had spent the time alone in her grandmother's library, researching demon-human relationships and the specific terms of infernal contracts, trying to understand the full scope of what she had committed herself to. What she discovered was both better and worse than she had feared. The fertility issues were real but not absolute, as Damien had said. More concerning were the references to something called soul resonance, a phenomenon that occurred when demon and human souls were bound for extended periods. The texts were frustratingly vague about the exact nature of this resonance, but they all agreed that it was irreversible and profound. When Damien finally appeared in the library doorway, she was seated in her grandmother's favorite chair with a dozen ancient tomes spread around her. He looked uncertain for the first time since she had known him, as if he wasn't sure of his welcome. "May I come in?" he asked, his usual confidence replaced by something approaching vulnerability. "It's your house too now, isn't it?" Serafina replied, though her tone was gentler than it had been 3 days ago. "According to the contract, my possessions become yours just as surely as I do." "That's not how I see it." Damien entered the room but remained standing near the door, giving her space. "I see it as us sharing everything, including the responsibilities and the benefits." "Including the consequences of decisions made without full disclosure?" The question came out sharper than she had intended, but Serafina found she wasn't ready to completely forgive him yet. "Especially those." Damien's expression was solemn as he met her gaze. "I've been thinking about what you said, about making informed choices. You're right that I should have told you about the fertility risks from the beginning. But there's something else you should know, something I've been afraid to tell you because I thought it might drive you away." Serafina felt her stomach clench with apprehension. "What now?" "The soul resonance." He moved closer, though he still maintained careful distance between them. "You've been reading about it, haven't you?" The texts are frustratingly vague about what it actually means. Serafina closed the book she had been reading and fixed him with a steady stare. "Why don't you enlighten me?" Damien was quiet for a long moment, and she could feel his internal struggle through their bond. Whatever he was about to tell her was difficult for him, which made her even more nervous about hearing it. "When demon and human souls are bound together for an extended period," he said finally, "they begin to merge. Not completely, but enough that separating them becomes impossible without destroying both parties involved." "How extended?" Serafina's voice was barely above a whisper. "The process begins after about 6 months and is usually complete within 2 years. Damien's eyes held a pain she had never seen before. "I should have told you that too, but I was afraid you would see it as a trap rather than the natural evolution of our bond." The revelation hit her like a physical blow. Not only had she bound herself to Damien for eternity, but within 2 years their souls would be so intertwined that ending the relationship would literally destroy them both. The choice that had seemed like a desperate necessity 3 weeks ago suddenly felt like the most naive decision she had ever made. "You're right," she said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "I do see it as a trap. A very elaborate, carefully constructed trap." "It's not a trap, Serafina." Damien moved closer, though he stopped when she held up a hand to ward him off. "It's the natural consequence of the kind of love that exists between beings like us. The soul resonance only occurs when the emotional bond is genuine and deep." "Love?" The word came out bitter and mocking. "How can I trust anything you say about love when you've been systematically deceiving me about the terms of our relationship?" "Because everything I feel for you is real." Damien's eyes blazed with desperate sincerity. "Every touch, every word, every moment of desire and tenderness, all of it is genuine. The deception was about the consequences, not about my feelings." Serafina wanted to believe him, could feel through their bond that he was telling the truth about his emotions. But the revelation that their souls were already beginning to merge made it impossible for her to trust her own feelings. How much of what she felt for him was real, and how much was supernatural manipulation? "I need air," she said, standing abruptly and heading for the library's French doors that opened onto the garden. The evening air was cool against her skin, and she breathed deeply as she tried to process everything she had learned. Behind her, she could hear Damien following at a respectful distance, though he didn't try to speak or touch her. "The worst part," she said finally, not turning around to face him, "is that I understand why you did it. If you had told me about the soul resonance from the beginning, I probably would have found another way to deal with the supernatural threats. And then I would have missed out on..." "On what?" His voice was soft and careful. On the most incredible 3 weeks of my life. Serafina turned to face him, and the pain in his expression almost undid her resolve to remain angry. On discovering that I'm capable of power I never imagined. On feeling desired and cherished in ways I never knew were possible. Then why are you so angry? Because you took away my choice. The words exploded out of her with enough force to shatter the fountain in the center of the garden. You decided what information I needed to make my decision, and you manipulated the circumstances to get the outcome you wanted. How is that different from what any other predator would do? Damien flinched as if she had struck him, and she felt his pain echo through their bond like a physical ache. Because a predator wouldn't spend every moment of the past 3 weeks trying to make you happy. A predator wouldn't worship your body like a sacred temple or listen to your dreams and fears with genuine interest. A predator wouldn't fall so completely in love with you that the thought of losing you is more terrifying than facing eternal damnation. The raw honesty in his voice broke something inside her chest, and Serafina felt tears she hadn't realized were building spill down her cheeks. Through their bond she could feel the depth of his emotion, the desperate love that had driven his deception, and the genuine remorse he felt for hurting her. I love you too, she whispered, the admission torn from her against her better judgment. That's what makes this so hard. I love you, but I don't know if those feelings are real or if they're just a product of the soul resonance. They're real. Damien stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. The soul resonance doesn't create artificial emotions, Serafina. It amplifies and strengthens feelings that already exist. What you feel for me, what I feel for you, it all started before the binding began to take effect. How can you be sure? Because I felt it the moment you first summoned me. His hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing away her tears. Before we signed any contract, before your soul touched mine, I was already lost. You called to something in me that I didn't even know existed. The sincerity in his voice and the emotion flowing through their bond convinced her that he was telling the truth. Whatever had grown between them wasn't artificial or manipulated, it was real and powerful and overwhelming in its intensity. What happens now? She asked, leaning into his touch despite her better judgment. Now we have a choice. Damien's eyes were serious as they met hers. I can break the contract if you want me to. It will be painful for both of us, and dangerous for you since your power is now tied to our bond, but it can be done. Or we can accept what's growing between us and see where it leads. What about the soul resonance? Can that be stopped? Not stopped, but it can be slowed. If we maintain emotional distance, avoid physical intimacy, the process might take decades instead of years. His smile was sad and self-deprecating. Though I have to admit, maintaining distance from you is the last thing I want to do. Serafina studied his face, seeing the love and desire and desperate hope he was trying so hard to hide. The smart choice, the safe choice, would be to ask him to break the contract and reclaim her humanity. But looking at him now, feeling the echo of his emotions through their bond, she realized that safety had never been what she truly wanted. I don't want distance either, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I want the fire, Damien. I want the passion and the power and yes, even the danger. I just want the choice to be mine. It is your choice. His other hand came up to frame her face, and his touch burned like a brand against her skin. Every day, every moment, it's your choice. If you ever want me to leave, if you ever regret the path we're walking together, all you have to do is say so. Even after the soul resonance is complete? Even then. His smile was fierce and tender all at once. I would rather face oblivion than keep you bound to me against your will. The promise in his words, the absolute certainty that he would sacrifice everything for her happiness, finally broke through the last of her resistance. Whatever the future held, whatever consequences their bond might bring, she wanted to face them together. Then I choose you, she said, rising on her toes to meet his lips with her own. I choose the fire and the passion and the eternity of uncertainty. I choose love even if it cost me everything else. Damien's kiss was desperate and grateful and so full of love that it stole her breath away. When he lifted her into his arms and carried her back toward the house, Serafina felt the rightness of the choice settle into her bones like coming home. "No more secrets?" she asked as he carried her up the stairs toward their bedroom. "No more secrets," he promised, his eyes blazing with infernal fire and something infinitely more precious. "From now on, we face everything together." As the door closed behind them and Damien began to worship her body with the reverence of a man given a second chance at paradise, Serafina realized that some choices were worth any price. The soul resonance might bind them together beyond hope of separation, but she was beginning to understand that some bonds were meant to be eternal. Outside their window, lightning split the night sky in brilliant white flames, and Serafina decided that storms had never looked more beautiful. In Damien's arms, with his love burning through her like liquid fire, she had found her home at last. Whatever the future held, they would face it together, two souls binding into one in an infernal dance of desire and devotion that would burn for all eternity. The contract was sealed not just in blood and magic, but in love freely given and joyfully received. And as Damien's hands and mouth claimed every inch of her burning skin, Serafina knew she had made the only choice that mattered. She had chosen love, chosen fire, chosen a life extraordinary enough to match the power that flowed through her veins. She had chosen forever, and forever had never felt more perfect.